Cordelia Vance holds the note on my dead father's garage, pays for my little sister's heart, and wears my ring on her left hand, and those three things are one lock with 3 keyholes. It is 8 in the morning at Ashfield House. She sits across the breakfast table in a gray dress with her hands folded, watching me eat cereal like it is the best film ever made. 19 staff, 140 cameras. There is an envelope by my bowl. She slides it across with one finger, and her whole face goes bright because she is sure this one lands. "Open it, Theodore," she says. "I have been awake since 4 thinking about your face." Inside is a deed. Ambrose Diner, corner of 9th and Wick, the place where I cooked eggs for 3 years at $12 an hour for a man who taught me everything I know about heat. I ask where Ambrose is. She says she offered him $400,000 for a building worth 90, and he cried. And now he fishes on a lake 2 hours north. She says it the way you hand somebody a puppy. So that is my job gone. The crew took severance and scattered. Rosa from culinary school got a full ride to Lyon 12 days after she laughed at a joke of mine in the parking lot, and she is not coming back. Danny, Ruiz, and Beck each got $25,000 and a job in another city. 3 friends, 3 envelopes, 1 week. Only Wes stayed because Wes is too stubborn to be bought and too broke to move. My lease ended early. My phone routes through the estate switchboard now. Every room I sit in logs me, and the insurer keeps the footage for 7 years, because that is the policy on a house full of paintings. And people hate me when I complain about any of this, and I understand exactly why. She is beautiful. 4 languages, the Harbor Division, a cello that makes grown men embarrassed, 24 years old. Any other man would take this trade at a run. So, on the first Tuesday of October, I stop working on doors and windows and start working on her. If I cannot leave, she has to want me gone. She has to look at me one morning and feel sick. Have a book for that. $2 from a bin at Union Street Station, bought on the night I did not get on the train, because I needed something to hold and everything else cost more than I had. The Alpha Heir Handbook, by a man calling himself Rex Danner. 49 moves for the modern young master. Under every move, there is a bold line that says exactly what it will do. Page 50 has been torn out. Move 1. Give her a small order in front of the staff. Printed result. She feels reduced and begins to withdraw. That is the exact product I need, so I put the deed down and I stand up. "Cordelia," I say, "my laces are loose." She looks at my shoes. She looks at me. Grant the butler is 4 steps away with the coffee pot, and he goes very still, the way a man goes still when weather is coming. "Kneel down and tie them," I say, "flat and board, the way the book tells you. A young master never asks twice, it says on page 9, so I do not ask twice. I just look at her and let the silence do the work." She kneels. The gray dress spreads out on the marble. Her hands come around my ankle, careful, like she is handling something expensive, and she ties a bow so neat it belongs in a shop window. So I go all the way. I look down at the top of her head and I say the ugliest sentence I have ever said out loud. "Down there is where you belong, and everyone in this house already knows it." Then I wait for the slap. I wait for the crying, the cold voice, the door, the lawyer, the end of my sentence. My heart is going so hard I can feel it in my teeth, and I am ready to look sorry and not mean it. She does not slap me. Her hands stay on my shoe. Her shoulders come down and her breath catches once and then runs quick and shallow. And when she lifts her face, her eyes are wet and bright and completely awake. "Say it again," she says, and her voice has dropped somewhere lower than she keeps it. Slower this time. Do not rush the middle part. I am standing in a marble hallway with one shoe tied by a woman worth more than my entire street. Behind me, Grant sets the coffee pot down very quietly, the way a man leaves a room that has caught fire. "What else?" she says. "Theodore, look at me. What else do you want me to do? Because I will do it, and I will do it properly." That is the moment I understand that I aimed at the exit and hit the accelerator. I go up the back stairs 2 at a time and lock my door, which is a joke, because she has the key, and I have watched her hold it. I sit on the floor with the book in both hands, and I read Move 1 again like it might have changed. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzes. It is her. The message says, "I have been thinking about it, and I would like to be clear that I did not mind." Then a second one. "Was the bow acceptable?" I do not answer. Just before noon, Nettie the housemaid knocks and tells me a delivery has come for the front hall. She is 19 and she is trying so hard not to smile that her whole face shakes. In the front hall, exactly where I stood, there is now a low velvet stool, gray to match the dress, flown in from a workshop in Milan that morning by a woman who apparently called them at 5 in the morning to ask if they could hurry. Grant tells me the price without me asking, $11,000 plus the flight. He says it the way a doctor reads a chart, and then he opens his little black book, writes a line, and closes it again. "What are you writing?" I ask him. "Household record," he says. I keep one. I have kept one for 29 years, and I have never once been asked to stop, which is either trust or nobody remembering I exist. I want to say something clever. Instead, I go outside and stand on the gravel and try to breathe, because the thing I built to get me out of here has just been bolted onto the wall as furniture. Through the window, I can see her in the front hall, working out where the light falls on it, and moving that stool about 4 inches to the left, and then moving it back, and then leaving it where it was. Now I need to explain two things before you start shouting at me, because everybody shouts at me about these two things, including my sister, including a priest, including a bartender who threw me out over it. First, why not just leave? I tried in March. I got as far as the platform at Union Street with a duffel bag and a ticket, standing under the board watching the minutes drop, feeling like a man for once. 50 minutes after I walked out the gate, the foundation account closed. My sister's clinic called me on the platform. Aftercare, card declined, please advise, we cannot hold the appointment. While I stood there with the phone against my ear, an estate car came round the taxi rank twice, very slowly, with nobody sitting in the back of it, and then went away up the ramp and did not come again. 2 years ago, the Vance Foundation paid for a valve in Mira's chest. You cannot hand a heart back. That money is spent, it is inside my sister, and it beats about 70 times a minute. I got on no train. I walked back through the rain and rang the bell of the house I was running from, and she opened the door herself, and she did not gloat. She just looked relieved and asked if I had eaten. She had kept a plate. 2 hours in a warm oven, dried at the edges, and she stood in the hall and watched me eat it in a wet coat and did not say one word about the ticket that was still in my pocket. Second, why not go to the police? Or to her family? I did both. The police took 4 minutes and 30 seconds, and I know that because a clock over the sergeant's head was the only friend I had in the building. He was kind at first. He asked for the address. He wrote Ashfield down. Then he stopped writing and looked at the paper, and something in his shoulders changed, and he asked me to wait while he made a call. A man named Holloway arrived before I finished my sentence. Family counsel, gray suit, soft handshake, a folder under his arm that he opened on the desk like a picnic. In the folder were consent forms I signed when I was 19 years old, monitoring for insurance purposes, location sharing for personal security, household media release, my own signature 14 times in my own stupid handwriting. Then Holloway read the deposits out loud in a helpful voice. $81,410 a month, $19,000 a term for a school in the hills, $206,000 for a garage note bought at auction. Every figure in that folder was hers, and I had never once heard her say any of them out loud. She has never told me the price of a single thing unless I made her, and a paid man had all 4 of them by heart. The sergeant looked at me the way you look at a rich kid throwing a tantrum about his allowance. He asked if I wanted to file. I said no. Nothing she does is a crime. She buys things. That is what money is for. She never asked me one question about that afternoon. Holloway telephones the house before he telephones anybody, so she knew by 4, and what she did about it was buy the police station a coffee machine. It arrived 3 days later, chrome, about the size of a suitcase, with no card on it and nothing to sign for. Grant told me the price, because Grant tells me every price. $2,400. I asked her why. She said the sergeant had been kind to me and had been drinking out of a jug that had been standing on a hot plate since morning, and she said it as though that settled the matter. As for her family, complaining to them is like complaining to the landlord about the walls. Isadora Vance told me at dinner, with soup in front of her, that an attachment they can see is cheaper than one they cannot. She said that in front of Cordelia. Cordelia did not flinch. She reached for the salt and passed it to her grandmother and said thank you for the soup, and I sat there feeling something I did not have a word for yet. So that is the shape of the box. It is a receipt. The money is spent and it is inside the people I love, and you cannot hand that back and there is nothing there for me to pick, which is why I have a $2 paperback and a plan, and why the plan is now a piece of velvet furniture in the front hall. That night, there is a dinner. 12 people at the long table, candles, a fish that costs more than my father's van. Cordelia puts me on her right hand and puts her hand on my knee under the cloth. Down the table sits Desmond Locke. He chairs the trust committee, which I understand about as well as I understand the moon, and he has a smile that arrives before the rest of his face agrees to it. Beside Locke is a broad man with white eyebrows and a laugh like a door, Halvard Brandt, shipping. He tries the fish, closes his eyes, and says whoever cooked this understood the fish personally. I like him for 6 seconds. Behind Locke's chair, against the wall, stands a young man in a plain suit with a tablet. Roland Pike. Documentation officer, Grant tells me later. He has been on the household roll since June, and nobody knows what he documents. Isadora sits at the head. When the plates are cleared, she taps the table twice, and everybody stops talking, including the man carrying a tray, who has to stand there holding it. The first Monday of December, she says, the block transfers, 38%. She looks at Cordelia, the way a farmer looks at weather. Between now and then, no surprises, no scenes, no photographs. Cordelia says, "Yes, grandmother." Then she takes my hand on the table in front of everyone and holds it. Locke watches that. He does not look angry. He looks like a man who just found a coin on the street. Move 2. Talk about other women in front of her. Printed result, she feels replaceable and pulls back to protect herself. I look at that page for a long time in the bathroom, and then I go back to the table and use it. I say loudly that the waitress at the club had a very good laugh, and I have been thinking about it all week. There is no waitress. There is no club. I have not laughed at anything since March. 2 of the guests go quiet. Brant coughs into his napkin. Grant, refilling water, tilts the jug half an inch and pours a perfect line and does not spill a drop, which somehow makes it worse. Cordelia turns to me with her chin down and asks very calmly what the laugh sounded like. Then she asks if the woman was taller than her and where the club is and whether I would like her to be more amusing at meals. I say something cruel about how she could try. She nods slowly, like I have given her a task at work. Then she asks Priya, out loud, to move her Thursday because she needs an afternoon. Priya Rains is her assistant. She is 29 and she has the eyes of a woman who has watched everything twice. She writes it down without changing expression and mouths 4 words at me across the table. Please stop feeding it. After the guests go, Cordelia finds me in the kitchen where I am eating cold fish over the sink like a raccoon, because that is my 1 hour a day when nobody watches me chew. She stands in the doorway. She says, "I looked up 14 comedy clubs. I have bought the Tuesday slot at 2 of them so I can practice where nobody I know will see me." Is that pathetic? And here is the trouble. It is pathetic. It is also the single most honest sentence anybody has said in that house since I arrived, and it goes straight through my ribs and sits down there. I say, "Cordelia, you do not have to be funny." She says, "Then tell me what I have to be, and say it in the voice you used this morning." And I put my plate in the sink and leave the room without answering. Move 11. Withdraw affection for a full day. Printed result, she panics, then resents the panic, then leaves. So the next day, I do not speak to her. Not one word, from 6 in the morning until dark. At noon, she sends a fruit basket to my own room, in my own house, with a card that says, "No pressure," and a smaller card behind it that says, "I counted. It has been 6 hours and 40 minutes. At 4, she walks past my door 9 times. I know it is 9 because I start counting at 3 out of pure spite. And on the 9th pass, she stops and says through the wood, "This is very good. Keep going." At 7, Nettie brings a note. It is a hand-drawn chart. Hours of silence along the bottom, something called "My Resolve" along the side, and a line that goes down and then flattens out at a level marked "Still awake." At 9, there is a knock, and when I open the door, she is sitting on the floor of the corridor with her back against the wall and her shoes off, and she looks up at me with her eyes red and says, "I did not cry. The shoes hurt." The Alpha Heir Handbook promised me panic and resentment. What I get is a woman on a floor who has never in her life had somebody refuse her anything, holding a chart she made herself, thanking me for the practice. I sit down on the other side of the doorway because my legs stop wanting to hold me. We do not talk for a while. Down the corridor, a camera housing turns half an inch with a small sound, the way they do, and neither of us looks at it. Finally, she says, "My mother left when I was 6, and my father died when I was 10, and every person in this house since then has been paid to be near me." She says it flat, like a shipping report. And she says, "You are not paid." And I want to tell her that the 81,000 in my sister's chest says otherwise, and I open my mouth to say it, and I look at her face, and I do not say it. That is my first real mistake, and I would like it on the record that I know it is a mistake while I am making it. The next morning, Roland Pike is waiting for me by the gun room with his tablet held against his chest like a hymn book. "Mr. Ward," he says, 2 minutes. Household climate survey. Entirely routine. He wants me to sign a statement. It is 1 page. It says the resident heir has displayed erratic and escalating behavior toward household members and that I, as a member of the household, have witnessed episodes of impaired judgment. I read it twice. What is on that page is a woman who sat on the floor outside my door with her shoes off and thanked me for the practice, written down by a man who has never been in the room with her. I ask him who reads it. He says the trust committee reviews household climate quarterly. I ask him who asked for it. He says, the committee. I ask him who on the committee. He smiles like a man closing a drawer. I do not sign. He says that is absolutely fine, thanks me twice and writes something anyway, and walks off down the corridor under the cameras with the neat little steps of a man who has already got what he came for. I stand there, and I feel the first cold thing that has nothing to do with her. It is a small feeling. It is the feeling of being used as a tool by somebody who did not ask, and it has a smell, and I know that smell. Downstairs, Cordelia is in the front hall in a black coat, going to work, and she stops when she sees me on the landing. She says, "Theodore, do you need anything today?" I say, "No." She says, "I will be at the harbor until 7. Then she stands there for 2 more seconds and adds in a smaller voice, "If you want to order me around later, I will make time." Grant opens the front door for her. As she passes him, she says, "Good morning, Grant." And he says, "Good morning, miss." And she stops and says, "You have been here 29 years. And he says, 30 in April. She nods and goes out to the car, and Grant closes the door and takes out his little black book and writes a line and puts it back in his coat and looks at me on the stairs with absolutely no expression at all. That afternoon, I walk into town to see Wes because I am allowed out and because a man needs one person who has never signed anything about him. Wes Okafor works at a hardware store on Dell Street and has wanted the shuttered bar next door since he was 17. He talks about it the way other men talk about a woman. Good bones, he says. Long bar. Original tile. We sit on the loading dock with 2 sodas and I tell him everything, and he laughs so hard he has to put his drink down, and then he stops laughing and says the thing that stays with me. He says, "Theo, listen, you went in there to make her let go. What if the only thing she has ever wanted is for somebody in that house to want something out of her that is not money?" I say that is disgusting. He says sure and takes a drink and looks down the street at the shuttered bar with its dead neon and its for lease sign, and he says nothing else about it that day. I walk home the long way past the diner. The lights are off. The stools are still in there. Somebody has stacked the chairs on the tables the way Ambrose liked, and the deed to all of it is in my sock drawer, and I have not touched it since Tuesday. Move 22 says to command her in public where strangers can hear, because a woman will accept a great deal in private and almost nothing in front of witnesses. Printed result, humiliation, then flight. So on Friday, I let her take me to Hales, which is the kind of restaurant where the menu has no prices and the waiters walk like they are carrying something asleep. She books the corner table. She wears green. I start the second we sit down. I tell her the wine is wrong. I send it back twice. The second time I do it while she is still holding her glass, and I tell the waiter that Madam does not choose the wine at this table. The room hears it. A woman 2 tables over stops with her fork in the air. The waiter, a boy of maybe 20, looks at Cordelia for rescue, and Cordelia looks at me with her lips slightly open and her ears going red. I keep going. I tell her to move her chair closer, and she moves it. I tell her to hand me her phone, face down, and she hands it over. I put my hand out for it without looking at her, palm up, bored, the way the book says. Somewhere behind me, a man says, "God," and a chair scrapes. A woman by the window has her phone out under the table, and I can see her thumb moving, which I file away without understanding what I am filing. Cordelia's ears are scarlet now, all the way to the edge of her hair. Her hands are flat on the cloth. She is breathing through her mouth in a way that I read as fury, because I am an idiot with a paperback. Then she says very quietly, without looking up, "Theodore, ask me for the salt like that. Just like that. Do not soften it." I say, "Salt. Now." She hands me the salt with both hands, and she closes her eyes for a full second while she does it, and the whole room is watching. And when she opens them again, they are shining, and she says, "Thank you." I drop the salt. It goes straight into the butter dish and lies there, and nobody in that entire room moves because they are all waiting to find out what kind of animal I am. The waiter comes back with a fresh cellar, and Cordelia takes it from him and hands it to me herself, and then she tells him in her ordinary boardroom voice, "Please tell Hale the room is very good tonight. The acoustics carry." We drive home in silence. She looks out the window with her fingers pressed against her mouth like a woman doing arithmetic, and Ozzy the driver keeps checking me in the mirror as if I have set something on fire. On Saturday morning, Grant tells me at breakfast that Miss has acquired Hales, the whole building, freehold, staff contracts, wine cellar, everything, for $2.1 million, which is roughly double what it is worth. I say, "Why?" He says, "I could not tell you, sir." Then he pours the coffee and adds, "That is a lie. I could tell you, but I would like to see your face when she does it herself." She does it on Sunday. The car takes us to Hales at 7, and the doors are locked, and the sign says closed for a private event, and inside there are no customers at all, only the staff standing in a line, every single one of them. The waiters, the bar, the kitchen, 22 people in black along the wall like a school photograph, and the corner table set for 2 with the same green napkins as before. Cordelia takes off her coat and says, "I have explained the format." She turns to me, so nervous her hands are shaking, and says, "You can be as rude as you want, and nobody here will lose their job over it." The head waiter steps forward and says, "Good evening, sir." Then, reading from a card in his palm, he adds, "Tonight the gentleman chooses the wine, and Madam does not choose anything." I stand there in my coat with my hand still on the button, and the whole line of them watches me stand there, and somebody at the far end of it coughs into a fist. I say, "Cordelia, this is insane." She says, "It is not, I costed it. The staff wages for the evening are $940 and the food is coming out of the walk-in anyway." The boy waiter from Friday grins at me and mouths, "Be mean." One of the line cooks is filming on his phone. A woman from the bar says, "We rehearsed twice this afternoon, sir. You can go harder than Friday." 22 grown adults have been paid to stand in a room and watch a woman be humiliated at her own request. And every single one of them is having a lovely evening, and I want to lie down on the tile. So I do the only thing I can think of. I take off my coat, I walk past her, I push through the kitchen doors, and I start cooking. The kitchen goes silent. The chef de partie says, "Sir," and I say, "Move." And the strange thing is that he moves, because a kitchen will obey anybody who touches the pans like they belong to him. Make her eggs. Just eggs, the way Ambrose taught me, low and slow with a wooden spoon. 20 minutes for something that costs about 40 cents, on toast, with pepper, and nothing clever anywhere near it. I carry the plate out and put it in front of her and I say, "Eat that and stop buying restaurants." She looks at the plate. Then she asks what it cost, and I tell her 40 cents, and she says that is not possible, and I say, "It is eggs, Cordelia. It is only eggs." And she picks up the fork and eats 2 bites, and then stops. She puts the fork down very carefully. She sits there with her hand over her mouth in front of 22 employees, and she cannot get a word out. Nobody in her life has ever handed her a thing without a number attached. 2 bites of egg from a man with no money, and it takes her apart in a way that shouting never once managed. The head waiter looks at me. I look at him. He puts the card back in his pocket and says, quietly, "I think we are finished for the evening," and the staff file out through the back without being told. Later, in the car, she says, "That was cruel." I say it was eggs. She says, "I know," and turns her face to the window, and I sit there working out that my hammer keeps landing as a bouquet no matter which end I swing. On Monday, I walk into the orangery, which is a room full of dying lemon trees where nobody ever goes, and Priya Rains is already in it with a cardboard box open on the table and a stapler in her hand. I ask what she is doing. She turns her tablet round without a word. It is 4 lines long, it is dated today, and the last line thanks Cordelia Vance for 4 years. I sit down opposite the box. I say, "Why this morning?" She says, "Because the December calendar came through at 8 and there is a room booked on the first Monday for a review, and I know what a review is." Then she tells me, fast, the way people talk when they have already decided to be somewhere else. The trust that holds the block carries a condition written by her grandfather. If the heir is judged unable to exercise sound and independent judgment, the block does not transfer to her at all. It goes to the committee for 5 years, and 7 men hold it, and the chair decides which way it votes. I say, "Who chairs it?" She looks at me like I have asked which way the sea is. Then she says, "Desmond Locke," and puts a box of paper clips into the cardboard box on top of the stapler. I say, "That is a rule about madness." She says, "It is a rule about judgment, and the difference between those 2 words is worth about $900 million, so people are extremely interested in the difference." Then she stops packing. She sits with both hands flat on the lid and says, "A woman filmed you at Hale's on Friday, and by Saturday morning that clip had been bought, not shared with friends. Bought for money." I ask who bought it. She says she does not know, and that if she knew, she would already have done something stupid about it, and that this is the 3rd reason the box is on the table. I say, "Priya, do not go." She laughs at me, one flat, unfunny laugh, and says, "Then give me a reason, and make it a reason, and not a nice feeling." So I give her the only one I have. I say, "She ate 2 bites of an egg." And Priya goes very still, and after a while she says, 4 years. And I have never once watched that woman eat anything in front of a person. Then she takes the paper clips back out of the box, and then the stapler, and puts them where they came from, one at a time, which takes longer than the packing did. At the door, she stops and says one more thing. "Whatever it is you are doing to make her let go of you, it is going into a folder, and the folder does not belong to you." I sit in the dead orangery for a long time after she goes, looking at the lemon trees nobody waters, and trying to work out how a plan to get thrown out of a house became somebody else's property. On Wednesday, I go to see my sister, because the school allows visitors on Wednesdays, and because I need to look at a person who likes me for free. Mira is 15. She has our father's chin and our mother's mouth, and a scar down the middle of her chest that she shows people at parties because she thinks it makes her interesting, which it does. We sit on the wall by the sports field, eating terrible school biscuits, and she asks me about the house and the food and whether it is true that there is a whole room in it just for coats. Then she asks, "Is she nice?" And I open my mouth to say a long list of things, and what comes out is, she bought a restaurant so that 22 people could stand in a line and watch me be rude to her. Mira thinks about that, kicking her heels against the wall. Then she says, "That is either the worst thing I have ever heard or the saddest thing I have ever heard." And I say it is both, and she says, "Yeah, I thought so." Then she asks the thing she always asks. She asks if I am going to be all right, and she asks it in the exact voice our mother used, which is a filthy trick for a 15-year-old to be carrying around. I tell her about the checkup. Second week of December, cardiology. The account covers it. She rolls her eyes and says she knows. They send her a text, and then she says quietly, "Do not do anything stupid because of me." Too late, I say, and she laughs, and we finish the biscuits, and on the bus home I count the things in my life that stop existing if I walk out, and the number is 4, and every one of them has a face. On Thursday, Cordelia asks me to come down to the harbor, and I go, because I have never seen her work, and because a man in a cage should at least learn the shape of the bars. The harbor division is 9 berths, 4 cranes, 2,100 employees, and a great deal of shouting. Her office is a glass box above the container yard, and she does not sit in it. She stands at the window with a radio. There is a problem when we arrive. A hauler contract has gone bad. 41 trucks are parked outside the gate, and the man who owns them, a red-faced person called Kessel, talks over her twice in the first minute. I stand by the window with a paper cup of terrible coffee, and I watch her stop being a girl who buys restaurants for a boy and turn into something with a jaw on it. She asks Kessel 3 questions and lets him answer all 3. Then she reads his own numbers back to him. The fuel escalator, the demurrage clause, the 22 days he has been late, without notes and without raising her voice. Then she says, "Mr. Kessel, your trucks are on my apron, and every hour they sit there cost me $7,400, and I have already paid another firm to be here at 4. Move them or I will invoice you for the crane time." He moves them. It takes 8 minutes. When the last truck clears the gate, she turns around, and she is a completely different animal from the woman who sat on my corridor floor with her shoes off. Then she looks at me, and the animal goes away, and she says in a small voice, "Was that all right? Did I do it right?" And she means it. She is asking a cook with no money whether she ran a harbor correctly. I say, "That was terrifying." She says, "Good," and goes pink to the ears, and behind her Priya mouths at me, 4 years? 4 years, and puts both hands over her face. On the way out, we pass a group by the weighbridge, and one of them is the big man with white eyebrows from the dinner, Halvard Brandt in a yellow safety coat, looking up at the cranes the way a man looks at a horse before he buys it. He shakes my hand and says, "The fish man," and I say, "The shipping man," and he laughs his door laugh and says, "Come and see my yard sometime. I have a crane older than your country." Cordelia says, "Halvard is here for the winter tour." Brandt says, 3 days a year I am allowed to touch other people's cranes, and laughs again, and I laugh too, and I go out through the gate thinking about lunch. At the gate, Roland Pike is standing beside a white car with his tablet, in a coat too thin for the wind, and when he sees us, he lifts a hand and says, "Miss Vance," and she says, "Mr. Pike," and does not slow down. In the car, she says, he asks the staff questions. I say, "I know." She says, "He asked Nettie whether I sleep." Then she looks out the window and says, "Tell me to do something." And her voice comes out completely flat. I say, "No." She says, "Please." I say no again, because for the first time, it feels less like a game and more like a woman asking for a painkiller, and I do not like the shape of my own hand around that bottle. We do not speak for the rest of the drive. When we get home, she goes upstairs without her coat, and Grant picks the coat up and writes a line in his little black book, and I hear the pen move in the quiet hall. At night, I go looking for something to read that is not a $2 paperback, and I find the library at the end of the west corridor with the lamp on and nobody in it, and on the table beside the chair, there is a book lying face down. I turn it over. It is the Alpha Heir Handbook by Rex Danner. The same cover, the same idiot in sunglasses, except this copy is new and somebody has had it rebound in dark green leather with the title stamped in gold, like scripture. I open it. Every page is annotated in her handwriting, in pencil, small and neat and even, and there are little tabs down the edge in 4 colors, and every one of the tabs has been labeled. The label on the yellow tab says, "Done." The label on the blue tab says, "Waiting." I take the green book down to the small drawing room, and I put it on the table in front of her while she is tuning her cello, and I say, "Explain this to me right now." She does not even flinch. She puts the bow down and says, "I bought a copy on the second day. You left the original on the bed, and the cover was so ugly I thought it might be a joke, and then I read it." "Second day," I say. She says, "The second day. Move 1 was the shoes. I had already read Move 1 9 times by then, and I had decided in advance that I was going to enjoy it, and then you did it, and I did." I sit down because my knees are being unhelpful again. I say, "You knew, every single one." She says 49 of them. "Yes, and I know which ones you have used and which ones you are saving, and I know you are frightened of Move 31. I say, "What is Move 31? She flips the book open without looking at the tabs and reads it out. "Bring another woman to a family event." Printed result, she collapses in public and the relationship ends within the week. Then she closes the book and says, "I would like to know in advance if you are going to do that one, because I would need to eat something first, and my grandmother watches my plate." That sentence does something to my chest that I do not have a good word for. It is a woman calmly planning her own meal around her own destruction and asking politely for a timetable so she does not faint. I say, "Why did you not throw the book in the fire?" She says, "Because it is the only book in this house that is about you. Everything else on those shelves is about money, or Italy, or horses." Then she picks up the bow again and adds, without any drama in her voice at all, "I know you are trying to leave. I have known since the shoes. I am simply not going to help you do it, and I am not going to stop enjoying it either." So my one weapon is a book my target has memorized and annotated in 4 colors. I do the only thing left. I go off the page. If the printed moves are being read like a menu, then I will do things that are not printed anywhere, and I will make them small and cold and stupid, because small things are what actually rot a house. I stop saying her name. For 4 days I call her nothing at all. No Cordelia, no anything, just a flat voice from across a room, the way you address a dog you have not decided about. On the 4th day, I find that she has removed her own nameplate from the study door, just taken it off, filled the screw holes with wax, painted over the wax. Grant tells me she did it herself at midnight with a screwdriver from the tool shed. I go to her office at the harbor and I say, "Put the name back." She says, "Why?" I say, "Because it is your name." She looks up from a birth schedule and says, "You were not using it." Then she asks if I would like her to be called something else. I say no. She says, "You could pick one." I say, "Absolutely not." She says, "All right," and looks back down at the schedule, and I stand there for a while. And then she says quietly, "Thank you for coming down here to shout at me. It was a good afternoon." Next, I try being expensive. Rex Danner has nothing on this, and every story I ever heard about a rich woman and a poor man says the man ruins himself on her money and she despises him for it, so I go and spend. Take her card and I buy a watch, $22,000, gold, ugly as a hotel lobby. I wear it to breakfast and I put my wrist on the table where she has to look at it, and I say, "I am going to buy 4 more. She looks at the watch. Then she puts down her cup and says, "Buy 9 more. I say, "What?" She says, "Buy 9 more, and I will build the case for them. I have wanted a project, and please choose ugly ones so that they are honest." I have to leave the room. In the corridor, I lean on the wall and laugh with no sound coming out, the way you laugh when the alternative is worse, and Nettie comes round the corner with towels and says, "Sir, are you all right?" And I say no, and she says, "Yes, sir." Next, I try being useless. I stop washing up my own plate. I leave my clothes on the floor of the bathroom. I break a 200-year-old cup by putting it on the edge of a table and walking away, on purpose, while she watches. She has the cup fixed with gold, which apparently is a thing people do in Japan and which apparently costs more than the cup, and then she puts it back on the shelf at the front where everyone can see it. At dinner, she tells 9 guests the story of the cup. She says, "Theodore broke it," and she says it the way other women say, "Theodore proposed." The guests look at me. Brant raises his glass. Locke does not. Next, I try gambling because a trash heir gambles. I take $400 of my own money into a card room off Dell Street and lose it in 1 hour and 40 minutes to men who were very polite about it. I come home stinking of smoke and I stand in the hall and announce that I have lost, and I make it sound worse than it is. I say I owe money. I say there are people who will come to the house. Her whole face changes, and it does not change into anger. It changes into weather, the kind that makes farmers walk out into the yard and look at the sky without saying anything. She says, "Names," just the one word. Then she says, "Theodore, I need the names." And Grant is already in the doorway with her coat, and Priya is on the phone in the corridor saying, "No, tonight, no, tonight." I have to spend 20 minutes explaining that it was $400 and that nobody is coming and that I made it up. And when she finally believes me, she sits down on the stairs and puts her face in her hands. Then she says, into her hands, "Do not do that one again." And I say, "Why?" And she lifts her head and her eyes are red and she says, "Because for 1 minute I thought somebody had put a hand on you." That is the first time it occurs to me that the woman who took my job and my friends and my phone might also be the only person in this city who would burn a building down for me, and that both of those are the same appetite. I write it in the back of the paperback that night, in the blank pages where page 50 used to be. I write, "Everything I do that costs me nothing, she eats." Then I sit there and look at the sentence for a while, and I do not know what to do with it. The following Tuesday, Isadora Vance summons me to the yellow room, which has a fire in it and no clock, and I sit in a chair that has been designed to make you feel about 7 years old. She is 81. She is small and very neat, and she does not blink much. And she looks at you like she is working out what you are worth. She takes her time. She lets the silence do what my paperback says silence does, and she does it better than the paperback. Because she invented it. She says, "You are unhappy here." I say, "Yes." She says, "Good. Unhappy is stable. Happy men get ideas about deserving things." Then she tells me my own value, out loud, like reading a weather report. She says, you cost this family $81,000 for the child, $410 a month, $19,000 a term, and $206 for the garage. She says, in 11 months, you have cost us under $350,000, which is what my granddaughter spends on flowers, and in exchange, her attachment is visible, local, poor, and easy to watch. I say on flowers. She says, she has an arrangement with a grower in Kent and it is cheaper by the year, and then she stops because she can hear what she has just done to her own point. I say, sorry. Go on about my price. And she says, thank you. And she does go on. And I sit in the little chair thinking that this woman would haggle over the wood of her own coffin. Then she says, when Locke's people ask you questions, answer them honestly. Tell them everything. She waits. I say, why would I do that? And she says, because honest men are predictable, and predictable is cheaper than loyal. I say, do you love her? And the room goes so quiet that I can hear the fire eating. Isadora says, I raised her to be worth something, and I did it well, and there are 16,000 people whose wages depend on how well I did it. Then she looks at the fire and says, love was not the assignment. On the way out, I pass the long portrait corridor, and there is a picture of Cordelia at about 8 years old in a blue coat standing next to a horse, and she is not touching the horse, and nobody is touching her. That night, I do something I did not plan. I go down to the kitchen at 10:30 and I cook. Not for a scene, not for the book. I just cannot sleep and my hands want a job, so I make soup because soup takes 2 hours and I have 2 hours. midnight, she appears in the doorway in a dressing gown with her hair down and her feet bare, and she stands there like a person who has heard a noise in a house that is never noisy. I say, sit down, and she sits so fast that the chair squeaks on the tile, and then she folds her hands in her lap like a girl at an interview she has already been told she has failed. I give her a bowl. She holds it in both hands and does not eat, and she says, is this an order or a thing? I say, it is soup. She says, that is not an answer I know how to file. So I say, it is a thing. And she eats it, all of it, and then she asks if she can have the pot. And I say the pot has to stay in the kitchen. And she says, then I will come back to the kitchen. Is that allowed? I say, Cordelia, it is your kitchen. And she says, yes, but it is your pot. And there is nothing in this house that is mine that is also somebody else's. And I would like there to be one thing. Then she asks what the soup is called. I say it is not called anything. She says, no, the recipe. And I say, there is no recipe. It is whatever was in the fridge on a Tuesday. She puts her spoon down like I have told her the cranes run without a schedule. She says, then how does anybody order it? And I have to turn round and put my face in a cupboard for a second. I sit there. 2 in the morning, 1 pot, 140 cameras, 1 man who is supposed to be escaping, and 1 woman who owns his life, eating soup at a scrub table like a pair of night porters. She falls asleep in the chair with her cheek on her arm. I put a coat over her, and I go upstairs, and I lie awake, and I say out loud to the ceiling, you are here to get out, and the ceiling does not argue, but it does not agree either. In the morning, the pot is back on its shelf, washed, upside down, in the wrong place by about a foot. Grant tells me Miss did it herself at 6 and would not let the kitchen touch it or put it right. There is a note under it in pencil. It says, is soup a thing that can happen twice in a week, or does that spoil it? I put the note in my coat pocket, and I carry it about all day without deciding to. That same morning, Desmond Locke invites me to lunch, and I say yes, because a man who has been kept in one house since the winter will get into almost any car that stops. He sends a car, not a Vance car. A hired one, a plain gray saloon with a driver who does not speak, and it takes me to a members club on Harrow Street with a green door and a porter who takes my coat like it is evidence. Locke has a corner table. He orders for both of us without asking, and he does it well, which annoys me more than if he had done it badly. Then he leans back and looks at me with genuine warmth, and that is the frightening part. He starts with her, kindly, the way a man asks after a horse with a bad leg. He says, how is she this week? Is she sleeping? And I think about a woman asleep in a kitchen chair at 4 in the morning with my coat over her. The food comes, and it is very good. I catch my own hands working out how the kitchen held the sauce at that temperature for a whole service, and I have to stop, because that is the most disloyal thing my hands have done all autumn. He says, how are you finding the house? I say, cold. He laughs. He says it is a cold house, and it has been a cold house since her grandfather, and I have sat in it for 26 years watching cold be done to a child. Then he says, I want to be straightforward with you, Mr. Ward. I am not a villain in a story. I am the person who signs things when the family cannot, and there is a decision coming in December, and you are standing in the middle of it. He tells me the shape of it, and he tells it fairly, which is how I know he is dangerous. The heir must show sound and independent judgment. There is a review. It is a formality in most years. This is not most years. He says, she bought a restaurant for 2.1 million so that its employees could watch you insult her. That is on a piece of paper on my desk now, with the price on it. And the price is what matters to 7 old men. I say nothing at all. He butters his bread with the calm of a man who has never once needed the next sentence to arrive quickly. Then he says, you are not the disease. You are the fever. Nobody is angry at a fever, and when the fever breaks, she will get on with her life and marry somebody appalling from Geneva and be perfectly content. I ask him what he wants. He says, nothing today. He says, I only want you to know that when you decide you would like to be free of this, there is a door, and I hold the handle and I will not charge you for it. And then he leans forward and says the sentence he came to say. He says, tell me, Mr. Ward, does she ask you to do it? The humiliating. Does she ask? And I look at that kind, warm, reasonable face, and I understand for the first time that every single thing I have done since the first Tuesday of October has been going into a folder with a price on the front of it. I say, no. She does not ask. I am simply a bad person, and I say it flatly, and I make my eyes dead while I say it, and it is the first time in my life I have lied to protect somebody with money. My hand is in my coat pocket the whole time I'm saying it, on a folded pencil note about soup, and I keep it there until he has finished being disappointed in me and moves on to fishing. Locke smiles and lets it go, and we eat, and he talks about fishing for 20 minutes, and when I stand up to leave, he says, one more thing, and hands me a card. It is a bank card in a paper sleeve, and the name embossed across the front of it is mine. I put it on the table and walk out. Halfway down Harrow Street, I realize that walking out is exactly what a man does when he wants to be asked twice, and that Locke will know that too, and I feel sick in a whole new flavor. So I stop at a phone box on the corner and telephone the house and leave a message with Grant. The answer to the note is yes. Twice in a week does not spoil it, and she is not to buy anything for it. He reads it back to me in his flat voice, the way a man takes an order for coal. Then he says, sir, may I add the word please to the end of that? And I say, yes, Grant, add the word please. I go to Dell Street because I need Wes. The hardware store is shut. There's a note on the door about family matters, which is not a thing Wes has, and when I look next door, my stomach turns over. The shuttered bar has a new sign on it. Not a for-lease sign. A permit notice taped inside the glass with a name and a date, and the name is Okafor, and the date is 9 days ago. I stand outside that bar for a long time, reading a permit notice through dirty glass. Okafor, 9 days ago. A liquor license application, a change of use, a fire inspection booked for the 22nd. Wes has wanted that place since he was 17. Wes has $1,200 in the world on a good month. Wes told me on a loading dock 4 weeks ago that a man cannot be bought, and then he drank his soda and looked at this exact window. I do not go and find him. I want to, and I do not. And the reason I do not is that I am afraid of what my face will do, and I have spent 2 months learning to make my face do things on purpose, and I do not trust it anymore. And standing in front of that glass, the person I want to tell about it is her, which is new and which I do not enjoy, because she is also the only person I know who could buy this entire street by Thursday. I go home instead, which is a word I have started using without noticing, and that is its own kind of alarm. That night, there is a party at Ashfield for 110 people, because Isadora holds one every November and has done since before I was born. Lights in the trees, a quartet. 2 men in the drive counting cars. Cordelia comes down the stairs in dark red, and the whole hall stops talking for about a second and a half, and I hate that I count it, and I hate more that I am the one she walks toward. She takes my arm and says, quietly, out of the side of her mouth, there are 41 people here who want something from my grandmother, and 9 who want something from me. If you would like to be dreadful tonight, tonight is efficient. I say, I am not doing anything tonight. She says, all right. And then, after 4 steps, if you change your mind, the terrace has better light. Roland Pike is here, not with a tablet. In a dinner jacket, holding a glass he does not drink from, standing where the room narrows so that everyone has to pass him. And Locke is here, being charming to a group of women by the fireplace, and when he sees me he lifts his glass an inch, exactly the way Brant does, and I understand that the 2 gestures come from the same club. Halfway through the evening, I find myself in the corner of the library with a plate of things on sticks, and I hear my own name through a door that is not quite closed, and I do the thing everybody does, which is stop breathing and lean. 2 voices. Locke, and a woman I do not know. She is asking about the December file. Locke says, we have 11 usable pieces. She says, usable how? He says, 3 from the house cameras, which are archived and cannot be pulled without a household request, so they are for later. 6 from phones, 2 from staff. The woman asks what a staff piece costs. Locke says, it depends on the staff. The girl who does the upstairs rooms wanted a reference and 40. He says the driver said no and repeated the whole conversation to the house within the hour, which is a shame because the driver sees everything and would have been the best of them. Then she asks about the friend, and Locke says, the friend was clean. He says, 60 for the lease, plus the fit out, and he has not been asked to say anything yet, and he will not be asked until December, because a witness is worth more if he has not been used. 60,000 for the lease, plus the fit out, plus a fire inspection booked for the 22nd, and not one word asked of him yet, because a witness is worth more clean. I stand behind that door with a plate of tiny sausages in my hand, and I feel the floor tilt, and the quartet keeps playing something bright and stupid in the next room, and I have to put the plate down because my hand is shaking. And the woman says, and the boy himself. And Locke says, the boy is the whole file. He says, everything he does, she pays for, and everything she pays for is a line item, and line items add up into a pattern, and a pattern is unsound judgment. He says it kindly. He says, I do not enjoy this, and I believe him, and that is the worst thing about the entire evening. I go out to the terrace, where the light is better, and I stand in the cold with my hands on the stone, and I do the arithmetic that I should have done in October. Every order I gave her, she paid for. The stool, 11,000. Hales, 2.1 million. 9 ugly watches with a case built for them. A comedy club Tuesday, twice. Every single one of my cruelties has a receipt with her signature on it. I did not build a way out of this house. I built a case against her, item by item, and I signed each item with her money, and there are 7 old men in December who are going to read it as a woman who cannot be trusted with 38% of anything. She comes out onto the terrace about 10 minutes later, because of course she does, because she has always known where I am since March. She says, you have gone gray. I say, I know about the file, and I say it flat, because I have been standing in the cold for 10 minutes practicing how to say it without my voice going up at the end. And she says, which one? And she asks it the way you would ask which coat, and she does not turn round while she asks it. Which one? She says again when I do not answer, and something in me goes very cold and very still, because a woman who asks which folder has been counting folders for a while. I say, Cordelia, Locke has been buying footage of me humiliating you since at least September. 11 pieces. He is going to use it in December to take the block off you and hold it for 5 years. He turns and looks out over the dark garden with the lights and the trees, and she says, 13 pieces. He has 13. 3 from the house archive he cannot pull yet, 7 from phones, 3 from staff, one of which is my own upstairs maid. I stare at the side of her face, at the lights and the trees going across it, and I say, you know, you have known this whole time. How long? She says, since the 4th week. Priya found the first payment because the man who made it used a company that shares an auditor with us, which was careless, and Desmond is never careless, which means he wanted me to know early. I say, why would he want that? Why would a careful man leave a payment where your own people could trip over it? She says, because he thinks knowing will stop me. He thinks I will send you away to protect the block, and then he wins in November instead of December, without a vote, without a fight, and everybody keeps their manners. I say, then send me away. Say the word. I will walk out of that gate tonight, and you keep the harbor and the block and the whole rotten pile of it, and I mean it. For the first time since March, I actually mean it. She goes quiet for a long moment. Then she says the thing that ends my October properly. She says, Theodore, in 24 years, you are the only person who has ever wanted something out of me that could not be paid. Everybody else wants the block or the name or the introduction. You want me to stop. She says, when you told me to kneel in the hall, you were not managing me, and you were not investing in me. You were being a person to me, and you were being a horrible person to me, and it was still the first time. And she says, so, no. I am not sending you away. I would rather lose 38% of a shipping company than go back to being a number in a folder that everybody is polite about. And I hear myself say, what folder? And the words come out before I have decided to send them. And there it is. Her whole face does something I have not seen it do before. It closes, the way a shop closes, all at once from the inside. She says, nothing. I say her name again, and I do not raise my voice, and I do not soften it either, and I ask her a third time what folder. She stands there with her arms crossed against the cold in a red dress worth more than my father's house, and then she says, all right, and she takes me upstairs, past the party, past the quartet, past Roland Pike standing in the narrow part of the room. Her study is the only room in that house with a lock she uses herself. Inside, there is a desk, a cello, a chair, and a filing drawer that she opens with a small key from a chain around her neck, which she has been wearing under her clothes the entire time I have known her. She takes out a bound document about as thick as a menu, gray cover, no title, and she puts it in my hands and then walks to the window with her back to me, which is how I know she has read it more than once. The first page says, "Private and confidential, prepared for the trustees." Below that it says, "Heir Profile and Valuation, C.A. Vance." Below that there is a date, and the date is from the year she turned 14. I open it standing up under a lamp with the quartet still going downstairs and 110 people eating things on sticks 2 floors below us. Page 1 is education. 4 languages, listed with fluency grades. Cello, grade 8 at 12 years old, with a note that public performance should be limited to family occasions to preserve novelty. Page 2 is health. Height, weight, eyesight, dental, a full workup, a line about the family history of the heart, a paragraph about fertility screening on a 14-year-old girl, and a sentence that says the indicators are favorable. Page 3 is temperament. There is a table. On the left, observed traits. On the right, management notes. Under stubbornness, it says redirect with responsibility. Under solitary habits, it says acceptable, reduces exposure. And at the bottom of that page, in the same neat print as everything else, there is a line that says overall temperament, manageable. Page 4 is the market. It says the combined value of an aligned marriage should not be assessed below $140 million. And there is a list of 4 families and what each of them brings, and one of them is crossed out in pen. And on page 5, there is a heading called Heir Premium, and under it a figure, $31 million, and a footnote explaining that the figure represents the excess value attaching to her person over and above the underlying assets. The excess value attaching to her person in print on a page with a staple in it. I read that 4 times. I am standing in a rich girl's study holding a document that prices a child's temperament, while downstairs a quartet plays and 110 people eat things on sticks. She says, from the window, without turning round, "I found it when I was 17. It was not hidden. It was in the ordinary drawer with the ordinary papers, because it is an ordinary paper." And she says, "I read the words overall temperament, manageable, and I sat on this floor, and I waited for somebody to come and be angry that I had seen it, and nobody came because there was nothing to be angry about." Then she says, "Do you understand now? Do you understand why a pair of shoelaces in a hallway did what 4 doctors and 20 years of good manners never did?" And I say no, because I am a coward and because I want her to say it, and she turns round and says it. She says, "Every order I have ever been given was an instruction to be worth more. Sit like that, you photograph better. Learn Italian, the Ferraris speak it. Do not perform in public. It lowers the novelty." She says, "Nobody in my entire life has ever told me to do a thing that made me worth less, and you stood in my hall and made me worth nothing at all, in front of my own butler, and for as long as I was down there, I was not an asset. I was a girl on a floor." And then she says, very quietly, "And I know that is broken. I know it. I have 4 doctors, and none of them will say the word out loud because of who signs the check." I put the folder down on her desk. I do not have anything clever. Rex Danner has 49 moves and not one of them covers this. So I do the only thing that has ever worked in that house. I say, "Come downstairs. I am making you something to eat, and you are going to sit at the kitchen table with your shoes off while I do it, and that is an order." She says, "Thank you," and she says it in exactly the voice a person uses for a bandage. I do not sleep that night. I sit on my floor with the $2 paperback and the green leather one side by side, hers open at move 1 with a pencil note in the margin, and I finally ask the question I should have asked in week 1. Why does a $2 paperback work on every living person in this city except the one woman I am aiming it at? Because it does work. I have watched it work. Rex Danner is a fool with a fake name and a photograph and sunglasses, and his 49 moves are cheap, and they land on ordinary people like hammers. So I tested. The way you test a sauce, by taking a spoonful somewhere, it cannot hurt anybody. The next morning, I use move 6 on Roland Pike. Move 6 is the correction in front of others. Printed result, the subject loses standing in the group and withdraws to recover it. He comes into the breakfast room with his tablet and his little hymn book posture, and in front of Grant and Nettie and 2 of the garden staff, I say, "Pike, you have asked the same question in 4 different ways and none of them worked. Ask a new one or go away." It lands exactly as printed. His neck goes red. He says something about routine, and then he does not finish it, and then he leaves the room, and for the next 2 days he stops questioning the staff in front of each other and starts doing it one at a time in the corridor. Nettie tells me afterwards that Miss asked her what I said to Mr. Pike, word for word, twice over, and then wrote it down on a card, and then asked whether I had used that voice, the flat one. The move works. The book is not broken, so the fault, if there is one, is in the target. And that is when I get it, sitting on a kitchen stool at 7 in the morning with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. Every one of those 49 moves does the same thing. It takes a woman who is treated as a person, and it treats her as a thing, and the shock of that drop is the whole mechanism. The book runs on the fall. Cordelia was never up there. She has been a thing since she was 14 years old, and it was written down and filed and priced at $31 million in a drawer that was not even locked. And you cannot push a woman off a ledge she has been living underneath since she was 14 years old, in a room where nobody even bothered to lock the drawer. So when I order her about, she does not fall. She goes sideways into a country she has never been to, where somebody wants something from her that is not on a balance sheet, and she has been walking around that country ever since with her mouth open like a tourist. Which means every printed result in that book comes out backwards on her and will keep coming out backwards for all 49 forever, and there is no move 50 because page 50 has been torn out. I write it in the back in pencil. The book only works on people who are being treated as people. Then I close it and put it in my back pocket, and I go and find the butler. Grant is in the plate room counting forks, which is a thing he does on Wednesdays, even though nobody has stolen a fork since 1991. I say, "Grant, the black book." He says, "Yes, sir," without looking up from the forks, and I ask him what exactly a man puts in a household record for 29 years. He straightens up and recites it like a man in church: arrivals and departures, deliveries with prices, instructions given and by whom, household incidents, staff hours, breakages, guests and where they sat. I say, "Instructions given and by whom?" He says, "Yes, sir, everyone." He says, "On the first Tuesday of October at 8:40 in the morning, Mr. Ward instructed Miss Vance to kneel and tie his laces, and Miss Vance complied." He says it without any expression whatsoever, and then he adds, "And within the hour, Miss Vance ordered a stool from Milan at $11,000, and I recorded that as well, in the line underneath." I say, "Grant, does anybody outside this house know that book exists?" And he says, "Mr. Pike has asked me twice." And I say, "And what did you say to Mr. Pike?" And Grant, who is 59 years old and has counted the same forks for 29 years, says, "I told him it was a shopping list, sir." Then he closes the drawer and says, "May I say something?" I say yes. He says, "In 29 years, that girl has never once asked me to sit down. Not out of unkindness. It has never entered her head that a person standing might want to stop." He says, "3 years ago, I put a request in writing that the staff be permitted to sit at their own table while eating, because we take our meals standing at the counter, and it went to the household office, and the household office is Mr. Halloway, and it was declined as a precedent." I say, "Why are you telling me this?" He says, "Because you are the only person in this house who has ever told her to do something, sir, and I thought you should know the size of what happens to people in this house who ask." And I say, "Grant, when this is over, I am going to fix your table." And he says, "That is very kind, sir," and does not believe me even slightly and goes back to the forks. Then there is Nettie. And Nettie is a worse problem than any of them because Nettie is 19 and I like her. I know she took the money because Locke said it out loud through a door. A reference and 40. 40 what? I do not even know at first. 40,000, Grant tells me later, which is more than that girl will earn in 2 years of turning down beds. I find her in the linen room on Thursday, and I close the door, and she looks at me and knows immediately, and her face goes the color of the sheets she is holding. She says, "Sir," and then she starts to cry, and it is the ugly kind, the kind that has been waiting behind a wall for a while. She says her mother has a shop that is going under, and there was a debt, and a man came, and it was so easy and so polite. And here is the thing I have learned about being poor and being asked. Nobody ever offers you money like a villain. They offer it like a colleague. That is why it works. So I do not sack her, and I do not tell the house. I sit down on a laundry basket, and I say, "Nettie, how often do they ask you?" She says, "Sunday nights." A phone call. "What was he like this week? Was she strange? Did they fight? Did she buy anything?" And I sit there on a laundry basket in a room that smells of hot cotton, and I say, "All right, keep taking their money." She stares at me. I say, "Keep taking it. Answer everything. Tell them exactly what you see. But from now on, before you answer, you come and find me, and you tell me what they asked, because the questions are worth more to me than the answers are to them." She says, "Sir, that is spying." I say, "It is spying either way. We are just going to do it in both directions. And if it goes badly, I will say I made you." Then I say the important part. I say, "And when they offer you more, take that as well." Because a question tells you what a man is missing. 6 weeks of Sunday questions is a map of everything Desmond Locke does not have yet, drawn by Desmond Locke, and delivered to me by a 19-year-old with a laundry basket. That is the first day I stop trying to get out of that house and start trying to win in it. I would like to say the change is dignified. It is not. The moment I stop looking for the exit, I have to look at everything else. And the first thing I have to look at is that I like the soup nights. And the second thing is Wes. I go to Dell Street on Friday. The bar has scaffolding inside now and a new counter half-fitted, and Wes is standing in the middle of it in a work shirt with a pencil behind his ear, looking like a man in a photograph of the life he wanted. He sees me through the glass, and his whole body says the truth before his mouth gets anywhere near it. He comes out. He says, "Theo." I say, "$60,000 for the lease, plus the fit-out." He says nothing for 4 seconds, and 4 seconds is a long time when you have known somebody since you were both 8. Then he says it. He says, "They told me it was about protecting you," and he says it looking at the pavement between our shoes. I say, "From what?" He says, "From her. They said you were in a situation and there would come a point where somebody would need to say out loud what had been done to you." And I said, "Yes, I will say it. Because it is true, Theo. It is true. Look at your life." And the terrible thing is that he means it. Wes is a straight man who got handed $60,000 and a reason in the same envelope, and the reason was even a good one, and that is how it is always done. I say, "When did they pay you?" He says, "Before the summer," and that stops me dead because September was when I thought this started, and before the summer is before I ever opened the paperback. I say, "Before I did any of it, before the shoes, before Hales." He says, "Yeah, why?" Because Locke was not collecting evidence that I abuse her. Locke was collecting a witness, and then he waited, and if I had never opened that book, he would have paid somebody else to invent one. I do not say any of that to Wes. I say one sentence, and then I walk away. And the sentence is, "I hope the tile is as good as you remember." He calls after me. He says my name twice. I keep walking, and by the corner my eyes are stinging in a way I decide is the wind. That evening is a Tuesday, which matters, because a woman I know bought 2 Tuesday slots at 2 comedy clubs 6 weeks ago so she could practice where nobody she knows would see her. I did not tell her I was coming. I stand at the back of a room above a shop on Carver Lane with 14 people in it and a light that buzzes. And at 9:20, a woman who owns 9 berths and 4 cranes walks up onto a carpeted box. She has index cards. Of course, she has index cards, numbered in a leather holder, because a woman who runs a harbor does not walk onto a carpeted box without a system. She does 5 minutes on shipping. She has a joke about demurrage that takes 40 seconds to set up and lands on nobody because 14 people in a room above a shop do not know what demurrage is. She does a bit about her grandmother that is so close to the bone that the room goes quiet in the wrong way, and she notices, and she keeps going, and her hands are shaking on the cards. And then she does 30 seconds about a man who cooks eggs. She does not say my name. She says, "I know a person who made me something that cost 40 cents, and I have not been the same since, and I am starting to think the entire price system is a scam." 4 people laugh. It is a real laugh. She stands there in the buzzing light with her mouth slightly open, absolutely astonished, and she says, "Oh," and looks at the 4 people like they have handed her something. Afterwards, she comes down and sees me at the back and stops dead, and for the first time since I met her, she looks like she wants to run. She says, "How long have you been standing there?" I say, "All of it." She says, "It is very bad. I know it is very bad. I have been told the demurrage one lands on nobody, and I cannot let it go." And I say, "Drop the demurrage one. Keep the eggs, and never do the grandmother one again in front of strangers." And she writes that down, on a card, in a comedy club, in front of me. We walk to the car, and it is raining, and she is carrying her coat instead of wearing it because her hands are full, and I take the cards off her and put the coat over her shoulders, and neither of us says anything about it. In the car she says, "Why did you come?" And she asks it looking straight ahead at the wipers. And I say, "Because you told me where it was, 6 weeks ago, at a dinner where I was being deliberately vile. And you told me anyway." She looks out of the window for a long time. Then she says one word into the glass, so quietly that I have to ask her to say it again, and the word is Delia. She says, "That is what my mother called me. Before. I have not heard it out loud in 18 years, and I have been trying to find a way to ask you to use it since the night of the soup, and I could not find one, so I am simply saying it." And I say, "All right, Delia." And she puts her hand flat over her mouth and looks out of the window for the rest of the drive, and Ozzy the driver very carefully turns the radio on. It is the 9th of November. There are 22 days until the first Monday of December, and I have a butler with a ledger, a maid with a phone call every Sunday, and a book that only works on people who have been treated like people. That is the whole army. I lie in bed that night counting it over and over, and it does not get any bigger, and I go to sleep anyway, which tells you how tired I am. On the 12th of November, my sister calls me from a corridor at her school, and she is trying to sound like it is funny. She says, "The pharmacy would not take the card." She says, "It is fine. The nurse gave me 2 days out of the cabinet, and honestly, the woman behind the counter was more upset than I was." I say, "Which card?" She says, "The blue one, the foundation one, the one that has never not worked." And then she says, "Theo, do not do the voice." And I say, "What voice?" And she says, "The one where you go quiet." I go quiet. which is the voice, and she knows it is the voice, and neither of us says anything for about 4 seconds while a school corridor makes its noises behind her. Then I call the foundation office, and a very nice woman explains to me that the account has not been canceled. It has been suspended pending review, and that suspension is entirely routine during a governance period. I ask who ordered the review. She says the trust committee's audit function. I ask who runs the audit function. She says, well, the chair, and then she hears herself say it, and there is a pause on the line about 4 seconds long. $410 a month. That is the whole size of the thing he has picked up and used as a hammer. A man deciding $900 million of votes has reached down and stopped $410 going to a 15-year-old. And it works, which is the disgusting part. It works better than anything else he has done, because within an hour I am standing in a corridor at Ashfield with my phone in my hand doing arithmetic I have not had to do since I was 20. Cordelia finds me standing there with the phone still in my hand. She takes one look at my face and stops walking and says, "What?" Just the one word, in the harbor voice, I tell her. She goes to her study and she is on the phone for 9 minutes, and I stand outside the door and listen to her voice change 3 times, and when she comes out, her face is white. She says, "My personal accounts are supervised until the block transfers. Every payment over $10,000 goes to the committee. Every payment to a household member goes to the committee, whatever the size. It was designed to stop me being defrauded by somebody like you." I say, "So pay it in cash." She says, "I have $300 in cash in this house, Theodore, and 6 cars. Then she goes upstairs without another word, and I take that for defeat, because I am still learning the difference between that woman being defeated and that woman going upstairs to find a pencil. At 7 the next morning, Priya catches me on the back stairs with a printout folded twice in her hand and her face the wrong color. She says she asked me for this at 4 this morning, and I have not sent it, and I am not going to. I say, "What is in it?" And Priya folds it away into her own coat pocket and says, "Go and ask her," and that is the first time in 4 years I have watched that woman refuse to hand somebody a piece of paper. Then she says one more thing on the stairs. She says, "She did not ask me for the committee. She asked me which of them has somebody in a bed, and that is a different question, and I have already been sick once this morning." I find her in the study at the desk with a legal pad and a column of figures going down it, doing the addition by hand, because she does not trust a machine with anything she is ashamed of. I say, "Delia, what is this?" And she does not lie, and she does not soften it, and that is what gets me in the chest. She says, "Sit down." Then she reads me the committee out loud, all 7 of them, in the order they sit at that table. She does the first one and stops to look at my face. A wife. A chest clinic on the coast. $3,000 a month. Renews in February. She says the month the way she says a birth window. Then the rest of them. 2 sons at a school that one of them will not finish. A daughter with a nurse in the house at night. A mother in a home up in the hills who does not know anybody now and has not since the spring. Beside every name a clinic, a treatment, and a month, and she has written the months in a column so that they line up, and 4 of the 7 fall before March, and she taps those 4 with the end of the pen. Then she asks me out loud the 2 questions she asked Priya at 4 in the morning. Which of them has somebody in a bed? And whether any of it runs through a foundation, and whether we sit on any of those foundations. I say, "Do we?" And she says, "We sit on 2. Then she says, "He stopped $410 going to a 15-year-old, so I would like to know what $410 looks like in 7 other houses." She says all of it perfectly level, with her hands shaking on the pad, and that is what I cannot get past. The voice is a woman reading a schedule out. The hands belong to somebody who has been awake since 4. I say, "You would do that to a sick person," and she says, "No." Then she says, "I would do it to the man who signs for the sick person," and I stand there working out that those are the same sentence with the furniture moved. I take the pad off the desk. She lets me. I tear the page out and fold it into my pocket, and I say, "Do that," and it stops being a story about a chairman who sold a harbor. It becomes a story about a woman who went after children. She sits with her hands in her lap for a long moment. Then she says, "All right." And then she says the thing that keeps me awake 2 nights running. She says, "Say it to me like that again whenever you have to, because I did not think of it myself, and I would like to know somebody will." On the way out, Priya tells me the other one, in the doorway, without turning round. There has been a car outside my sister's school since Tuesday. 2 men, a flask, and a bag of crisps handed through the railings at 4 o'clock. I go back in and tell her to take it away, and she says no, just the one word, in the harbor voice, and she goes back to her figures, and that car is still there in the spring. Then she says, "I will go to my grandmother." I say, "Do not," and I say it twice, and she goes anyway because she is a woman who has never yet been allowed to be told a useful no by anybody. Isadora hears her out in the yellow room with the fire going. I am not there. I get it later from Priya, who was standing in the corridor holding a folder and pretending to be furniture, which is her actual job description most days. Isadora says no. She says that paying the child's medicine out of family money in November is precisely the item Locke wants on the last page of his file, and that the smartest thing anybody in that room can do is nothing at all. And then she says the sentence that Priya repeats to me twice because she cannot believe it either. She says, if the boy loved you, he would have gone in March, and the girl would have her medicine, and we would all be having a much better winter. Cordelia comes out of that room and does not speak to anybody for 2 hours. She sits in the orangery with the dead lemon trees, in the cold, in her coat, and Grant takes her a blanket and comes back without it. Better man does something noble at this point. What I actually do is go upstairs, open my sock drawer, and take out a deed. Ambrose Diner, corner of 9th and Wick. Freehold in my name since the first Tuesday of October because a woman who wanted to be lovely to me signed a building over to a man with $900 and no idea what to do with it. It is the only thing I own in the entire world, and a building you own is a building you can borrow against. Go to 3 banks. The first 2 are polite about my employment situation, which is that I do not have one. The third is a small lender on Wick Street, run by a man who knew my father, and who looks at the deed and looks at me and asks one question. He turns the deed round twice under the lamp, and then he looks over his glasses and asks the only question that matters to him, which is whether she knows I am doing this. I say no. He says, good, and he lends me $12,000 against a $90,000 building at a rate that would make a shark blush, and I sign it, and I walk out into the cold with a bank draft in my coat. The pharmacy takes it. The school takes the arrears on the term, $4,200, and stops writing to me. The cardiology appointment in the second week of December is confirmed by text, and my sister sends me a picture of a receipt and 6 exclamation marks. Do not tell Cordelia. I tell Grant, because Grant writes everything down and I want it written down. And he takes the note and says, "Sir, may I ask why you did not simply ask her?" And I say, because for 2 years every single thing about my sister has been her money, and today it is mine, and I am going to have that for a week even if it costs me a diner. He writes that down too. All of it. The lender, the rate, the reason. Then he asks whether the diner is to be entered as a household asset or as Mr. Ward's, and I say Mr. Ward's. And Grant says, "Then I shall start a fresh page, sir," and he says it the way other men say congratulations, and he does start one, and he rules the top of it with a knife because there is no ruler in the plate room. And upstairs I do the rest of the sum, which is the one I did not say out loud to him. The arrears are gone and $12,000 carries my sister about a year, and after that year it is the foundation again, or it is nothing. The note on my father's garage is still hers. $206,000 of it, and a note can be called in by whoever holds the paper. So the gate is open and I still cannot walk through it, and that is the arithmetic. Next day I find out that the deed did not stay quiet, because nothing in that city stays quiet. And on the 14th of November, Desmond Locke sends the gray car for me again. Different restaurant this time. A private room. No menu, no waiter hovering, and a folder on the table that he does not open, which is a move so old that Rex Danner has it on page 4. Roland Pike is at the end of that table with his tablet, and nobody has offered him anything to eat, and he sits with the careful stillness of a man who has been brought along to hold a coat. Locke opens with her. He says Miss Vance telephoned his office on Monday and asked for the schedule of committee expenses, line by line, going back 4 years. He says it fondly. He says she is thorough. Her father was thorough. He says, I am sorry about the account. I say, no, you are not. He says, no, I am not, and he smiles, and I decide that I actually prefer him when he is honest, which is a trap, because that is the point of him being honest. Then he stops being sorry and makes the offer properly, in order, like a man reading a shopping list he wrote on the train. He says, $3 million, paid in 2 parts, one on signature and one on the 6th of December. He says, the child's aftercare funded to her 25th birthday through an independent bank, not the foundation, so nobody can ever touch it again, including me. He says, the garage note, $206,000, discharged, and the paper handed to you. He says, the diner mortgage you took out on Wick Street, cleared, and I hope you did not sign anything above 11%. He knows the rate, and he knows the street. And I sit there working out that the only person in this city who has not been told about that loan is the woman whose money I took it out to avoid. And in exchange, he says, you will sit in a room on the first Monday of December and answer questions honestly for about 40 minutes. I say, and if I refuse? He says, then we will use what we have, and it will be a longer meeting and slightly less pleasant, and the outcome will be the same, because the outcome does not actually depend on you. I say, then why pay me $3 million for something you are going to get anyway? Why not save the money and let the tape do it? And he says, because a witness is cheaper than an appeal, and an appeal is cheaper than a scandal, and that is the whole of my job in one sentence. Then he leans forward and does the thing that nearly gets him what he wants. He says, Theo, listen to me. Whatever you tell yourself, that house is a fault in a young woman that everybody has been polite about for 10 years. He says, and you have made it worse. Every time you play the young master with the shoelaces you feed it, and she goes further, and one day you will be 40, and she will be 38, and there will be a wing of that house nobody is allowed into. He says, I am offering you the exit, and I am paying you to take it. What kind of man would I be if I let you rot in there? And the worst thing, the very worst thing, is that some of that is true. I have thought some of that at 3 in the morning in my own words. Then I think about a hand-drawn chart with my resolve down one side of it, and a woman sitting on a corridor floor with her shoes off telling me she did not cry. The shoes hurt, and I keep my face still. So I sit there for a while, and then I ask him one question, and it is not a clever question, it is just the one I actually want the answer to. I say, Mr. Locke, what do you get? Personally, if it goes your way in December, what lands in your hands? He does not answer me. He turns his head about 5 degrees and says, Roland, and Roland Pike sits up like a boy called on in class and reads it off the tablet. Committee holds the block for 5 years. Chair receives 1.5% of block value per year, in line with market. Locke lets him get all the way to the end of it. Then he says, in line with market is a phrase men use when they have not read the market, and Pike goes the color of a raspberry and says, sir, and stops. I watch that happen, and I put it in my pocket, because I have just been shown the one thing that man cannot sit still for, which is his own number being called small by somebody who works for him. Then Locke does the rest himself, because now he has to. He says, there are assets in that group carried at a valuation nobody has revisited since her father died, and a trustee has a duty to realize value, and the harbor is the obvious one. Pike says, the harbor is not currently under review, and Locke says, no, Roland, and says nothing else at all, and Pike turns his tablet face down on the cloth and does not touch it again for the rest of the lunch. And there it is, the harbor. 9 berths, 4 cranes, 2,100 employees. The place where she stands at a window with a radio and is not a girl in a folder for 8 hours a day. I say, sold to who? And Locke says, oh, there is no shortage of buyers, and he pours water, and he changes the subject to fishing, and he does it so smoothly that if I had not been listening for it, I would not have felt the floor move. I do not take the money. I do not make a speech about it either, because that would tell him something. I say I will think about it, and I let him think that means yes, and he shakes my hand, and I go home. At night, Cordelia comes down with a fever, and I find out that a woman can own 4 cranes and still have absolutely no idea what to do about being ill. It starts as her being irritable at dinner, which she never is, and being cold in a room where I am warm. By 9, she is gray, and by 10, she is shivering, and by midnight, she is still on the phone to Rotterdam about a berth window, because there is a vessel due at 4 in the morning. I take the phone out of her hand. I say, in Dutch or in English, whichever, tell them you will call back. She says, I cannot. There are 14,000 tons waiting on a tide. And I say, Delia, the tide will happen whether you are on the phone or not. That is the entire point of tides. I put my hand on her forehead the way my mother used to, and she goes completely still under it, and her eyes close, and she says, oh, in a small voice, like somebody has put something down that she has been carrying. Then she says, I have not been ill since I was 9. I say, that is not possible. She says, I have not been permitted to be, and there is no self-pity in it at all. She says it the way you would say the harbor has 9 berths. Then she asks whether being ill is a thing that has to be scheduled. She says Rotterdam argues with a woman and obeys a piece of paper, so would I write her a note, and would I put in it that I have forbidden her the stairs? So I write it. 11 words on a sheet of harbor paper. She reads it 4 times, corrects my spelling of Wednesday, has it sent at once, and then sits back in the chair looking like a woman holding a winning ticket. I put her to bed, not in the way that sentence sounds. I make her drink water, and I take her shoes off, and I pull the covers up, and Nettie brings a basin and stands in the doorway looking like she wants to say something and does not. At about 2 in the morning, she wakes up, and I am in the chair, and she looks at me across the dark room and says, are you being kind, or are you being clever? And I say, tonight I am being kind. She says, tell me the truth, and I say, all right, both, and she says, thank you, and goes back to sleep almost immediately because that was clearly the answer that let her rest. In the morning, her fever is down and she has soup for breakfast, and she asks me, very carefully, over the bowl, why the pharmacy took the card on Tuesday when the foundation account is still frozen. I say, do not worry about it. And she puts the spoon down and says, Theodore, I have run a shipping division since I was 22. Do not tell a woman who reads 6 ledgers a day not to worry about a number. So I tell her, the deed, the lender on Wick Street, the 12,000, the rate. She does not say anything for a long moment. Then she gets up and walks out of the room, and I sit there thinking I have finally, at last, after 2 months of professional effort, actually managed to make her angry. She comes back 4 minutes later with her coat on and her keys in her hand and says, get in the car, in a voice I have only ever heard used on a man called Kessel. We drive to Wick Street. She goes into that little lender's office ahead of me, and I honestly think she is going to buy the building and the man and the street, and I am already composing the argument in the car park. She does not buy anything. She stands at that counter and she asks the man, in her boardroom voice, exactly what the terms are, and he tells her, and she listens, and then she says, "That is a fair rate for an unemployed borrower with one asset and no history." Then she says, "Mr. Ward will make his own payments. I would like to open a separate matter." And she asks the man whether he has ever financed a small restaurant fit-out on 9th and Wick. And he says, once, in 1994. Then, in the doorway, she asks whether she could borrow $12,000 herself at the same rate so that she knows what it is like. He asks about her employment situation. She says that is fair and thanks him. She talks about that the whole way to the car. A man asked her about her employment situation. She would like it on the record that she answered honestly and that he was not especially impressed by any of it. In the car afterwards, she looks straight ahead and says, "I nearly took it from you. In there. I had the sentence ready and everything." I say, "Why did you not do it? You had it ready. You could have cleared it before he finished the sentence and I would have been standing there like a fool." And she says, "Because it is yours, and it is the first thing you have ever had in this that is yours, and if I pay it off, then in 10 years, it will be another line in a folder and you will look at me across a table and know it." Then she says, "That is what I have instead of love, apparently. Arithmetic." And she laughs. And it is the worst laugh I have ever heard, and I put my hand over hers on the seat, and neither of us mentions it for the rest of the week. 2 days later, she gives me the best present anybody has ever given me, and it takes about 40 seconds to go cold in my hands. She does it in the kitchen at 6:30 in the morning, before anybody is up, which is how she does things she is nervous about. She puts a paper bag on the table and sits down and folds her hands and waits. Inside is a telephone, not a house one. A plain box with a number on the receipt that is not the estate number and does not run through the switchboard on an account in my name, paid a year forward out of the sort of money she is allowed to touch. She says, "It does not come here. It does not go through Grant or Priya or the board or me." Then she says, smaller, "I have wanted to do it since the night of the soup, and I could not work out how to do it without it being a leash. I sit in a kitchen at 6:30, holding the first private thing I have owned since March, and I have to put it down on the table because my hands have gone stupid. Then I lift the receipt to fold it, and underneath it, at the bottom of the bag, there is a second handset, the same one, already switched on. And when I pick it up, it is warm. I say, "What is this?" And she tells me in the flat voice, the shipping report voice, with no idea whatsoever that she is going out of a window while she says it. She says, "That one is mine. It has your number in it and nothing else in it at all. If you telephone somebody at 4 in the morning, it lights up beside my bed, and then I would know you were awake, and I could be awake as well." She says it like a service level, like a berth window. The kettle is on and the kitchen is warm, and I am holding a telephone that has been in her pocket long enough to take her heat, and every hair on my arm stands up. I say no. She says, "You have not heard the rest of it." I say, "Delia, no," and she stops. Then she does the worst thing she could possibly do, which is take the back off it there on the table and put the battery down between us, and go on sitting with her hands folded like a woman marked down on a test she studied hard for. And after a while she says, "I would like it recorded that I did not hide it. I put it in the same bag. I could have used a different bag and you would never have found it, and I thought about that for 2 days, and I did not do it." And what I take up to bed with me is that she is right, and that this is what getting better looks like on her, and that I said thank you. By the evening, Grant tells me that Miss still has the dead handset in her coat with no battery in it, and that she takes it out and looks at it about once an hour, the way other people look at a watch. I ask him under which heading that goes. He says, "Household incidents, sir." Then he says, "One telephone, kept for the weight of it," and shuts the book and looks at the ceiling for a while. On the 17th of November, the household staff are told that the trust committee will conduct on-site interviews before the review, and that everybody will be seen, and that attendance is compulsory. Grant reads the notice out in the servants' hall with his glasses down his nose. 19 people stand at the counter to hear it, because they always stand, because a request to sit was declined 3 years ago as a precedent. Miss is not there for the reading. Grant tells me she asked him at 7 whether staff interviews are a thing a person is allowed to attend, and that he said he would find out, and that he has not found out. Afterwards, he finds me in the plate room and closes the door and says, "Sir, a thought." He does not stop polishing. He says, "The house cameras, sir, 140. Everything they see goes to the insurer and sits there for 7 years, and the committee cannot pull one frame of it because the policy is not theirs." I say, "Whose is it?" He puts a spoon down on the cloth between us. "This is the house," he says. Then a fork, well away from it. "This is the committee." Then he taps the spoon twice and says, "The paper is written on the house," he says. "So a pull needs the head of household to sign, and the head of household is Mrs. Vance." Then he picks the fork up and drops it back in the drawer and shuts the drawer with his hip. Mr. Pike has asked 3 times since September, he says, to the drawer. Refused 3 times. Madam does not sign things that other people want, and that is the only principle she has, and today it is worth having. And I stand in a room full of forks, and I understand 2 things at once. The first is that the only complete record of everything that has happened in that house is sitting in a vault where Locke cannot reach it. The second is that to reach it myself, I will have to walk into the yellow room and ask an 81-year-old woman who priced her own granddaughter at $31 million to sign a piece of paper for me. Staff interviews happen on the 19th. Roland Pike sets up in the morning room with a jug of water and 2 chairs, and one by one, 19 people go in and come out. I sit on the stairs where I can see the door, which is childish, and I do it anyway. Nettie goes in fourth and comes out looking like she has been slapped and gives me a very small nod on her way past, which is our agreed signal and which she performs like a girl in a spy film. Ozzy the driver goes in 7th and is in there for 6 minutes. When he comes out, he stops in the hall in front of everybody and says loudly that he has told the gentleman exactly what he told the other gentleman in September, which is no, and that if anybody would like the details of either conversation, they are welcome to come and ask him in the kitchen, where he will be having his tea standing up as usual. At noon, Cordelia comes down in her coat and asks Roland Pike whether she might have a turn. He says, "Miss, you are the subject of the review." She says, "I know, I would like to hear the questions, I can practice." He looks at me. I look at the ceiling. She sits down in the chair anyway and asks him what the first one is, and he reads it out because he cannot think of a lawful reason not to read it out. It is whether the household is a calm place in which to work. She says, "No." He says he is not able to record that, miss. And she says, "That is all right. I only wanted to answer one of them once." Grant goes in last. He is in there for 35 minutes. When he comes out, his tie is exactly as straight as it was going in, and he walks past me without a flicker. Later, I ask him what he said, and Grant says, "I answered every question truthfully, sir." He asked whether the household record contains instructions given by you to Miss Vance, and I said yes, and he asked to see it, and I said he would need to ask the head of household. Then he says, Mr. Pike then asked me whether I would characterize Miss Vance's conduct as sound, and I said that I have been in service in this house for 29 years, and I have never been asked my characterization of anything, so I would need time to prepare one. I say, "Grant, that is the finest thing I have heard all month." And he says, "I thought so as well, sir, and I was quite pleased with it in the corridor afterwards." That evening, I go to the yellow room and ask Isadora Vance for a favor, which is a sentence that would have made me laugh in October and does not make me laugh now. She lets me stand for a while first. The fire does its work. There is a clock in that room after all, I discover, hidden behind a screen, and it ticks, and I think she put it there to be heard and not seen. I tell her what I want. The insurer's archive, a full pull of the house cameras for the whole of September, October, and November, under her signature as head of household, delivered directly to the trustees and not through the committee. She says, "Why?" I say, "Because Locke has 13 pieces of me being vile to your granddaughter, and every one of them is 30 seconds long, and 30 seconds is a lie. The house has all of it." She says, "All of it, including you, including every hour of you in my house doing whatever it is you have been doing to her." I say, "Especially me." That is the point of it. 30 seconds of a man is a weapon, and 3 months of him is a person, and I will take my chances with 3 months. She looks at the fire for a long time. Then she asks the question I have been dreading since the first Tuesday of October, and she asks it without any softness at all. She says, "Do you know what happens to her if the committee takes the block?" And before I can answer, she tells me. She says, "Nothing happens to her. She keeps the house, the horses, the cars, the name, and the allowance. She becomes decorative. That is all." She says, "And if you win, she keeps the harbor and 2,100 employees and a board that will spend 5 years testing her, and she will have to be twice as hard as her father was. And she was not built to be hard. She was built to be correct." Then she says, "So tell me honestly, boy, which of those 2 lives are you asking me to sign her into?" And I say the truest thing I have got. I say, the one she chooses. That is the entire difference, and it is the only difference, and you have never once let her have it. The clock behind the screen goes on ticking, and the fire eats, and an old woman looks at me for longer than anybody has looked at me in my entire life. Then Isadora Vance says, "Very well." And I nearly fall over, and then she says, "My price," and I remember who I am talking to. She says, "On the first Monday of December, there will be a room with the trustees in it, and the family, and the committee, and whatever press Locke has arranged to be accidentally passing." She says, "You will sit in that room and you will say out loud, in your own voice, everything you have done to my granddaughter since October, not summarized, not explained. The words you used, the day you used them, and what she did afterwards." I say, that is exactly what Locke wants me to do. Word for word, he offered me $3 million for that on Friday in a room with no menu. And she says, yes, it is. The difference is that he will pay you $3 million for it, and I will pay you nothing, and you will do it anyway, and every person in that room will watch you do it and know exactly what you are. Then she says, that is my price. I will not have my granddaughter saved by a man who gets to keep his reputation. I say yes before I have finished thinking about it, which is either courage or the same disease that made me open a paperback in October. She rings a small bell. Holloway comes in with a folder like a man who has been standing outside a door for 20 years. She signs the pull request in 3 places, and then she says, one more thing, Mr. Ward. She says, if you are wrong about her, and she is what the folder says she is, I will spend the rest of my life making certain you understand it. And I say, ma'am, if I am wrong about her, you will not have to. So now I need Desmond Locke inside this house, and I need him comfortable, and I need him talking about money. That is the whole shape of it. The insurer's cameras only cover Ashfield. Everything he says at a club on Harrow Street or in a private room with no menu is smoke, and always will be. But 140 cameras run in that house whether anybody likes it or not, into a vault the committee cannot touch, held for 7 years, under a signature I now have. The trouble is that Desmond Locke has been to Ashfield exactly twice this autumn, and both times he stood in the hall and left inside 40 minutes. He is not careless. He has been not careless for 26 years. Over my head while I am working this out, a cello is going. The same 8 bars, over and over, badly. She practices when she is frightened, and she has been at it since the staff were told about the interviews. So on Sunday night, I sit in the boot room with a 19-year-old housemaid and wait for a chairman's office to telephone her, because she is the only person in this city they call every week. Nettie sits on an upturned crate with the phone face up on her knee and her sleeve pushed back. She writes the questions on her arm in biro while they are being asked and washes them off afterwards. She says, sir, does she know about this? I say, no. And Nettie says she knows, because on Thursday, Miss asked me whether my mother's shop takes cards, and nobody in this house has ever asked me one thing about my mother. She whispers that it changed at the start of November. Before that, they only wanted the 2 of us, she says. Did we fight? Did we shout? Did she cry? Did she buy anything? Since November, they want papers. At 8:20, it rings. She looks at me. I nod. She puts it on the crate between us, with the sound turned right down, and says hello in a voice about 2 years younger than her own. A polite man in a warm room somewhere starts with the small talk. He asks after her mother's shop. He does it so nicely that I want to put my fist through the boot room wall. And he begins. Did they fight this week? Did she shout? Did she cry? Did she buy anything? Nettie answers all 4 flat and true, because true is the arrangement, and I can hear a pen going at his end. Then he changes gear. He asks whether there have been valuers at the harbor, whether anybody from the office has been down to berth 4, whether Miss Vance reads the carrying values. And then, in the same warm, helpful voice he used about her mother's shop, he asks whether a Mr. Brandt has been to the house at any point since the party. And that is when the boot room door opens, because Cordelia has come down through her own house in her stockinged feet at 8:30 on a Sunday, and she is standing there with her hand still on the handle. Nettie goes white. The man on the crate says, hello, are you still there? I get up very slowly and put myself between her and that phone and hold up one hand. She looks at me, then she looks at a 19-year-old with a biro list up her arm, and I watch a woman decide in real time whether to pick that phone up and use it. She does not pick it up. She stands there with her jaw set and her hands closed and lets a paid man ask her own housemaid about her own crane yard, and it takes about 40 seconds, and it costs her something to do it. Nettie says, no sir, not since the party. The man thanks her. He says the money goes in Wednesday as usual. He hangs up. Nobody says anything for a while. Then Cordelia crosses the room and crouches down in front of the girl who sold her and takes her wrist and turns her arm over and reads the list on it from top to bottom without a word. Then she says, your writing is very small. Nettie says, so they cannot see it, miss. And Cordelia says, that is sensible, and stands up and goes out and does not come back down that night. I sit down on the boot room bench between a rack of coats and 40 pairs of boots. Brandt, white eyebrows, laugh like a door, the fish man. 3 days a year, I am allowed to touch other people's cranes. Standing in a yellow safety coat at the weighbridge on a Thursday, looking up at 4 cranes the way a man looks at a horse before he buys it. I go to Priya and I ask her one question. I ask her who authorized the survey teams at the harbor this year. She takes 2 days, and in the middle of those 2 days, something happens that I do not see coming, which by then is my own doing, because I have spent a week shut in a dead orangery with another woman taking notes. On the second morning, Priya comes down with her coat already on and a travel folder in her hand and says, I am being sent to Rotterdam for 12 days. My flight is at 2, and I did not ask to go. I say, who signed it? She says, she did. Last night at midnight, straight to the travel desk. Then she says, in 4 years, she has moved me 5 times, and every single one of them was about a ship. I find Cordelia in the study at the window with a cup of coffee she is not drinking. I say, put Priya back. She says, no, in the harbor voice, without turning round. So I ask her why. And she turns round and takes an index card out of her sleeve, numbered in the corner, and holds it against her chest for a second, like a woman about to sing in front of strangers. Then she says it to my face, flat, the way she reads out a birth schedule, so that it will not sound like what it is. Since October, 43 hours in that orangery with the door shut, 8 of them after 9 at night, 2 of them on a Sunday. I say, 43. She says, 43. I say, that is not a number a person carries about in her head, and she says, no, it is a number a person carries about on a card, and puts the card down on the desk between us. It is laid out as a table. Date, start, finish, duration, ruled with a straight edge. Then she says, I would like you to check the last column because I did the additions twice and I do not trust the Sunday. So I stand in a study in the morning checking a shipping woman's arithmetic on the subject of my own afternoons. The Sunday is wrong. It is 2 hours and 10 minutes and she has written down 2 hours. I tell her that and she goes pink to the ears and says 10 minutes and writes it in. And I watch a woman make her own jealousy bigger on purpose because she cannot bear a column that does not add up. I say, Delia, what did you think was happening in there? And she looks at the lemon trees through the glass and says, nothing. I know it is nothing. I have known it is nothing for 43 hours. Then she says the true part. She says, she laughs at things you say. I can hear it from the corridor. I have never once made a person laugh without writing it down first, and she does it while she is stapling. I say, she laughs because I am useless with a stapler and she has to do my end of it. She says, oh. Then she says, is that all it is? And there is so much hope in the question that I have to look at the floor. I say, that is all it is. She says, thank you. Then, with no change of voice at all, she says she would still like the rest of that column checked by tonight because a thing added up wrong twice is worse than a thing not added up at all. And I stand in front of a woman with a card in her hand and I understand that the machine did not stop when we started being kind to each other. It went quiet and it kept running. I say, Delia, she is 29 and she is trying to save your company. And Cordelia says, I know. Her voice cracks straight down the middle of it. Then she says, that is why I did it at midnight instead of at breakfast. It costs to unwind. Rotterdam has already been told, and a birth manager there has already moved a week of his own life about to make room for her. Putting it back is $9,300 in changed bookings, and one apology she has to make herself, in Dutch, on the phone, while I stand in the room and listen to a woman being sorry in a language I do not have. It costs the other way too. Priya does not go, and Priya knows exactly why she nearly went, and for 2 days after that, she keeps the orangery door wide open, and neither of us says one word about the door. On the 21st, she comes into the orangery with a printout and her jaw set and says, Theo, sit down, and I say I am sitting down, and she says, sit down properly. 2 survey teams, March and August, both authorized under committee inspection powers, not by the division, which means Cordelia never saw the request. Both teams billed to a consultancy in Hamburg, both consultancies retained by Brandt Maritime. They have surveyed her berths twice this year. They have measured the cranes, the depths, the yard, the rail spur. That is due diligence, and due diligence is what a man does before he buys. I say, so Locke plans to sell the harbor to Brandt if he gets the block. Priya says, that is what it looks like. And I say, no, wait. And I sit there with the printout in my hand, and the cold comes up my back very slowly. Because a man does not order 2 survey teams in March for a thing he might control in December. March was before the summer. March was before the $60,000 for Wes. March was 7 months before I ever opened a $2 paperback and told a woman to kneel down and tie my shoes. Locke did not build this because of me. He built it, and then I walked in and made it beautiful for him for free out of a book. If I can find a piece of paper with a date on it and a number on it and Brandt's name, then the whole thing turns inside out. It stops being a story about an unstable heiress and becomes a story about a chairman who sold a division before the vote that was supposed to give him the right to. I cannot get that paper. I have no lawyers, no bank, no standing, and about $900. But I have one asset, and it is the only one I have ever had, and it has worked on every single person I have ever pointed it at except one. I am, in the eyes of every wealthy person in this city, a greedy little animal from 9th and Wick who tells an heiress to kneel in her own hallway, and Desmond Locke believes that with his whole heart, and he believes it because I made him believe it, item by item, since October. So I decide to be exactly that, one more time, on purpose, in a room with 140 cameras. I tell Cordelia. All of it, at the kitchen table at 1 in the morning with the pot between us. She listens without moving. When I finish, she says, you will have to be very good. He is not stupid. And I say, I know. He is certain, though, and certain is softer than stupid, and Rex Danner is very clear about that on page 11. Then she says, what do you need from me? Tell me the actual task and not the kind version of the task. And I say, I need you to be in this house on Thursday and to hear things said in the next room that will make you want to come through the wall and to not come through the wall. She looks at her hands for a while. Then she says, Theodore, I do not think I can do that. And I say, I know you cannot. I have watched you not manage far smaller things than that. So she says it herself in a flat voice, looking at the table. Then order me to. And there it is again. The thing that started all of this, sitting on the table between us at 1 in the morning. Except this time, I am not holding a paperback, and she is not a woman I am trying to escape. And it is not a game either of us is playing. I say, Delia, on Thursday, you will sit in the library with Priya, and you will stay in that chair until I come and get you, whatever you hear. She says, yes. And then she says, thank you. And her voice does the thing it does, and she puts her hand over her mouth, and I look at the ceiling for a second, because I am not made of stone. Then she takes her hand down and says, in a completely different voice, a working voice, and if he asks you to prove you can deliver, do not offer, make him ask twice. He respects the second ask. And I say, you sound like the book. And she says, the book is a cheap copy of my grandmother, and I have been read by professionals since I was 14, so let me help. We work on it until 4 in the morning at a kitchen table. She teaches me how a man like Locke says yes and where he keeps his papers, and that he carries a black leather case with a combination he never changes because he thinks nobody would dare. She teaches me that he always takes the chair with its back to the window, and that he never eats anything he did not order. She teaches me that he cannot bear to be told his own number is too small, and that if you name a figure, he will correct it upward to prove he is not a small man. At about 3:30, she puts her head down on her arms and says, into the table, I would like to say something, and I would like you not to answer it. She says, if you do this and it works, then in December I will have 38% of a company and a note on a garage and an account for your sister, and no reason left to keep you. She says, and I have thought about it every night this week, and I have decided that I would rather have the version where you can go. And she says, do not answer, and I do not answer. And I sit there in a kitchen at 3:30 with my hands on a cold pot, and I understand that I am not going to leave that house, and that nobody has bought me. And that is the most frightening thought I have had since March. On Tuesday, I call Desmond Locke, and I do it from the phone in the front hall, under the camera, and I keep my voice bored, the way Rex Danner tells you. I say, I want to talk about the money. He says, of course. He says, shall I send a car? And I say, no. I say, come to the house on Thursday at 11. And he says, that is not a good idea, Mr. Ward. And I say, it is a fine idea. She is at the harbor on Thursdays until 7. Ask your maid. There is a pause on the line, about 2 seconds long. And in that pause, I hear a man decide that I am exactly what he thinks I am. And then he says, very well, and hangs up. I put the phone down. The camera housing above the door makes its small sound and turns 1/2 inch the way they do. And for the first time since I came to that house, I am glad to be watched. And Wednesday night, I go down to the security office to rehearse it because I want to see the trap on a screen before I walk into it, and because the man who runs that room has a kettle, a crossword, and no opinions. Doheny is a retired sergeant with a mug with a cracked handle and a chair he has worn to the shape of himself. He puts me up in the morning room on the house phone and tells me to go ahead and say something. So I stand on the rug where Locke will sit, and I say the whole thing out loud to an empty chair. 410 million. Brant. The date. All of it, twice, at the top of my voice, for about 2 minutes. The only reason I have the words for an empty chair at all is that a woman sat up with me until 4 in the morning at a kitchen table, teaching me how a man like Desmond Locke says yes. Then I come down and he plays it back, and there I am on the screen in beautiful color, mouth going, hands moving, and the room is silent. He turns the dial all the way up, and it stays silent. He looks at me the way you look at a man who has gone the color of paper. He says, vision only, sir. Sound in a private dwelling is a different permission, and the insurer never wanted it, and nobody ever asked. 140 cameras in that house, and every one of them a beautifully lit film of 2 men in a room, and not one word of what they say in it. The plan I built at a kitchen table until 4 in the morning is a silent movie. I sit down on the spare chair and put my head in my hands, and Doheny, who is a kind man and therefore dangerous, asks whether I would like a tea while I am having that. And he asks whether Miss knows I am down here. I say no. He says, right you are, sir, and pours a second tea and puts it in front of me without being asked and goes back to his crossword. Then, after about a minute, without looking up from it, he says, they read very well, though. I say, read. He says, 32 megapixels on the principal rooms, because the policy is for the paintings. And then he leans past me and taps a photograph pinned to his board that has gone the color of weak tea with age. It is a courier docket lying flat on a table, shot from a lens above a fireplace right across the room, and you can read the date on it, and the handwriting, and the price of the delivery. I say, prove it to me now. So he sends me back up with the only paper in my pocket, which is the letter from the lender on Wick Street, and I lay it flat on the long table under the lens above the morning room fireplace, and stand well back. And Doheny reads it to me over the house phone in his flat sergeant voice, all of it. $12,000. The address of a diner on 9th and Wick. The rate, which he says twice because he does not believe it the first time, which is the exact moment Cordelia comes into the security office behind him looking for me and stops in the doorway and reads my debt off a screen in front of a retired policeman and a kettle. Nobody says anything for about 4 seconds. Then she says, 32 megapixels. And Doheny says, on the principal room's miss. And she says, thank you, and turns round and walks out. I catch her in the corridor. She is not angry. She says, I have walked past that door every day for 9 years and never once been through it, and until a minute ago I did not know a man in my house could read my post from across a room. Then she says, does it reach the long table? I say, 4 seconds flat on that table, and it reads anything. And she puts her hand over her mouth and thinks, and then she says, then he has to put it down himself, and he will never put anything down for a man he respects. And I say, no. He will only put a thing down flat for a man he is explaining it to, slowly, because that man is too slow to follow it any other way. Thursday comes with fog on the lawn. Cordelia leaves for the harbor at 7 so that anybody watching sees her go, and at the gate, she rolls the window down and says nothing at all, and then puts the window back up. And the car goes. She is back at 9, through the kitchen door, in a coat with the collar up, and goes straight to the library and sits down in the chair by the window, with Priya beside her, holding a folder she is not reading. At 11 o'clock, exactly a gray car comes up the drive, and Desmond Locke gets out of it, and so does Roland Pike. That is the first thing that goes wrong, and it goes wrong before either of them is through the door, because I have planned this entire morning for one man, and there are two. Grant opens the door. Locke says good morning to him by name, which is a thing Locke does, and Pike stands behind with his tablet against his chest like a hymn book, and Grant takes their coats and says, the morning room, sir. Above us, she is sitting in a chair by a window with her hands on the arms of it, because I told her to stay in it whatever she heard, and I can feel her up there the way you feel weather. And then Grant does the finest piece of work I have ever seen a man do with his hands full of wet wool. He says, Mr. Pike, while you are here, you asked me in October about the household record, and I was unable to assist you. Mrs. Vance has since given me leave to show it to you, if you would care to step through to the plate room. I watch Roland Pike's whole face change. 7 weeks that man has been asking for that book. He looks at Locke. Locke, who is certain, and who therefore is not paying attention to small things, waves 2 fingers and says, go on then. And Grant walks him away down the corridor at the exact pace of a man taking somebody to see Forks, and I hear him say, it is quite a long record, sir. We may want tea. And just like that, there is one man in the morning room after all, because a butler with a book of forks has taken the other one away. I take my place before Locke sits down. I take the chair with its back to the window, the one she told me he always wants, and I put my feet up on the fender and I do not stand when he comes in. He notices everything. He looks at the chair and then at me, and he decides, exactly as I need him to, that a boy from 9th and Wick who has smelled $3 million has stopped bothering to be polite. He sits down opposite me and arranges his cuffs and says, well, in the pleasant voice of a man who expects to be home by 1, I say 3 million is not enough. He smiles. He says, ah. And there is a small light behind his eyes because now we are in a conversation he has had 400 times and has never once lost. I do it the way she taught me. Bored, greedy, slightly stupid about the details, and very sharp about the number. I say, I have been thinking about the arithmetic all week, and the arithmetic is insulting. I say, 1.5% a year on the block for 5 years, that is what you told me. That is a salary. Men do not pay $60,000 for a bar on Dell Street before the summer for a salary they might get at Christmas. His face does not move, but he puts his water glass down, and he had not finished with it. I say, you set this up before I ever came near her. 2 survey teams, March and August, Hamburg Consultancy. I know what a survey is, Mr. Locke. My father had a garage, and men in coats came and measured it before the bank took it. And I say the last part slowly. I say, somebody has already bought that harbor, and you are going to be paid twice, and I want to be paid out of the second one. The room goes very quiet. Somewhere else in the house, a clock does something small, and outside the window, the fog is still sitting on the lawn like it has been paid to. 2 rooms away, a woman who owns 9 berths is sitting in a chair with her nails in the arms of it, listening to a man price her harbor through a wall, and staying where she is because I asked her to. And this is the moment where it can go 2 ways, and where a smarter man in his chair stands up and says, "Good morning," and leaves, and I have nothing at all. But Desmond Locke has spent 26 years watching that family, and most of a year watching me, and there is a folder on his desk with 13 pieces of a grubby boy in it. He knows exactly what I am. He is certain. So he does not stand up. He does what a certain man does when a small, greedy person underestimates his size. So he corrects me, out loud, in a room with a lens above the fireplace. He says, "Twice is a crude way to put it." Then he opens the black case on his knees, and my heart goes so hard I have to press my heel into the fender to keep my legs still. He looks up at the housing above the fireplace while he does it, the way a man checks the weather out of habit, and he is not worried by it at all. He says, "They belong to the insurer, those." My documentation officer has asked the old woman for a pull 3 times this year and been refused 3 times, on principle. Nothing leaves this house unless she signs, and she signs nothing anybody wants. He takes out a bound agreement, maybe 40 pages, blue-backed, and he holds it in his lap and taps it twice and says, "This is not a bribe, Mr. Ward. It is a plan, and plans are permitted." He says, "The harbor is carried in the group accounts at a value nobody has revisited in 9 years. He says the true price for the right buyer, with the rail spur and the depth, is a great deal more, and that a competent trustee has a duty to realize value." I say, "How much more? Give me the number you would give a bank and not the number you would give a boy." And he says, $410 million. 410. It is my sister's medicine, to the dollar, with a word changed at the end of it. I have to hold still for a second because something in me wants to laugh out loud in that room. I make my face do greed, and it is the easiest thing I do all morning, because it is the same face I made in October when I told a woman that her place was on the floor, and it is a face I now know exactly how to build. I say, "Show me." And I say it the way she taught me without any heat in it, like a man asking a butcher to turn the meat over. He hesitates. It is the first hesitation of the morning, and it lasts less than a second, and then he does the thing that certainty does, which is to be unable to bear a small person doubting it. I say, before he can recover, "I cannot read a contract, Mr. Locke. I left school at 17, but I can read a number, and I can read a name. And if I am selling my girlfriend for you, I want to see who I am selling her to." And Desmond Locke leans forward and lays the agreement flat on the long table under the lens above the fireplace, and turns it round so it faces me, and opens it at the execution page. He puts one finger on the buyer line and holds it there, and the name under his fingernail is Brant Maritime Holdings, and I think about white eyebrows and a laugh like a door. He moves the finger down to the figure and taps it twice, $410 million, in numbers and again in words, the way lawyers do. And then he moves it to the date, because he is a tidy man, and because he wants me to understand that this is a serious document and not a promise. And the date is the 9th of January. The 9th of January, which is 11 months ago, which is 9 months before I ever opened that paperback and told a woman to kneel down in her own hall. He says, completion is conditional on a change of control at trust level, which is expected in December. And I let out a low whistle like a boy who has never seen a big number, and I lean in so my head does not block the lens, and I say that again about the condition. And he says it again, slower, with his finger on the clause, because he thinks he is explaining a big idea to a small man. Then he closes it and puts it back in the case and clicks it shut and says, "So, $5 million and a fee on completion, and we will not discuss the fee again in this house." I say 10. He says 6. I say 7 and the paper on the garage. And he says, "Done," and puts out his hand, and I shake it, and I have never in my life wanted a bath so badly. He stands. He is at the door when he stops, and he says, without turning round, "You understand this only works if you are exactly what I think you are." And I say, "Mr. Locke, I have been exactly what you think I am since October. Ask anybody in this house." He laughs. He genuinely laughs and says, "That is true," and goes out into the hall, where Grant is already standing with his coat over his arm as if the entire morning had been scheduled. And Roland Pike comes back down the corridor looking like a man who has spent 40 minutes reading about forks. The car goes down the drive. I stand in the hall until the car turns out through the gate. Then I go into the downstairs cloakroom and I am sick, quietly. And I wash my face and I go and get her out of the library. She is sitting in the chair exactly where I put her. Priya has her hand on her shoulder. Cordelia's hands are on the arms of the chair, and her knuckles are white, and she has not moved. And when I come in, she looks up and says, "Was he in the morning room?" I say, "He laid it flat on the table, under the lens for 20 seconds. And she closes her eyes. Then she says, 410. And I say, the 9th of January. And Priya says a word that I will not repeat, and then apologizes, and then says it again. Doheny pulls the file that afternoon under Isadora's signature. He does it in front of me and prints 2 stills, and the stills are so clear you can read the word holdings, and the figure, and the date. I stand in a security office with a retired sergeant and a kettle, and I laugh until my eyes water, and then we have 12 days and nobody to tell. On Friday morning, we have nothing, because on Friday morning the story goes public. It comes out at 7 on a site that does city gossip, and by 9 it is everywhere. 31 seconds of a video from Hales in October, a young woman in green handing a man a salt cellar with both hands while he does not look at her. The headline calls her the kneeling heiress. Somebody has put the moment on a loop. By noon, there are 2 others, the stool in the hall, and 8 seconds of her outside the comedy club on Carver Lane carrying her own coat in the rain. I find her in the study with the door open and her back to it, standing at the window, absolutely still, with the phone in her hand face down on the sill. She says, without turning round, my grandmother has called twice. The board has called. Rotterdam has called, which is the one that surprised me. And the man in Rotterdam wanted to know whether I was all right. Then she says, 3,200 comments, and I have read a lot of them, and I would like to stop reading them, and I cannot seem to stop reading them. I take the phone off the sill. I do not take it out of her hand because she has not let go of it, and I do not want to be one more person taking things off her. I just put my hand over it until she lets go. And then she says the thing that takes the top of my head off, quietly, to the window, without turning around. She says, the comments are not wrong about me, and that is the piece of it I cannot put down. She says, that is what I did. I did hand him the salt with both hands. I stood in that hall and I let a man tell me where I belonged and I liked it, and now there are 3,200 people who know that about me, and every single one of them is correct. And I say no, and I say it loud enough that Priya looks in from the corridor and then goes away again very fast. I say, they have 31 seconds. They do not have the night you sat on my floor with your shoes off and a chart you drew yourself. They do not have you standing in a lender's office on Wick Street refusing to buy me. I say, they have got the worst 31 seconds of my life, and they think it is the best 31 seconds of yours. And on Monday, I am going to stand up in a room and hand them all the rest of it, every bit out loud with my name on it. She turns round then. She says, that is your grandmother's price. And I say, yes. She says, you cannot pay that, Theodore. You will not be able to get a job in a kitchen in this city. And I say, Delia, I own a diner on 9th and Wick and a $12,000 debt at a rate that would make a shark blush, and I am not currently worried about my prospects. And she laughs. It comes out of her wrong, half a sob, and she puts both hands over her face, and then she takes them down and says, all right, all right. Then we are both going to be publicly disgusting on Monday, and I intend to be better dressed than you. That afternoon, in the fog, Wes Okafor comes and stands at the gate of Ashfield House, like a man at a funeral he has not been invited to. Ozzy phones up from the lodge and says, Sir, there is a person here who says he is your friend, and he says it in a tone that suggests he has already formed a view. I go down. Wes is standing in the fog in his work coat with sawdust on his sleeves, and he has a brown envelope in his hand, and he is holding it out before I have finished walking up to him. He says, I did not read the small print in April, when they paid me and told me to sit quiet until the old man's lease on the bar ran out in the autumn. He says, I have read it now 4 times, in a room with no floor in it, and I want you to have it. Then he says, is it true, the thing they are printing about her? I say, 31 seconds of it is true. He says, is she all right? And I have to look at the fog for a second before I can answer him. Inside is his agreement. 4 pages. A consultancy retainer for a Mr. W. Okafor, $60,000, paid in April, in return for availability to provide a witness statement at a time to be determined. April. Wes told me before the summer, and he meant April, and April is 2 weeks after I stood on a platform at Union Street with a duffel bag and did not get on a train. And on the last page, above the counter signature, there is a counter signature, and it belongs to a law firm, and the firm is the one that Mr. Halloway uses. I say, Wes, do you know what you are actually holding here? Do you understand what this last page does to a man like Halloway? And he says, no, but I know it is not $60,000 for a bar, and I have not been able to stand in that room and lay tile for 2 weeks without wanting to be sick. So here, I say, they will take the lease off you. He says, yeah. I say, they will take the fit out and the license, and probably the 12 years you spent wanting it. And Wes Okafor, who has known me since we were 8, says, Theo, I sold you in April, and you found out in November, and you did not tell one single person, not even her. take the envelope. And he says, tell her I am sorry. And I say, I will not, because she would buy you something inside a week, and then you would owe her, and you have had about enough of owing people this year. And Wes looks up the drive at all those lit windows and says, yeah, that sounds about right. And then he shakes my hand in the fog and walks back down the road with his hands in his coat. On the Sunday night, I cannot sit in that house any longer, so I take the bus into town on my own and let myself into the diner with my own key in the dark to sit in the one room in this city that is mine. Except the room is warm, the heating is on, there is water in the pipes, the pilot light is lit, and there is a smell of hot dust off the radiators that a building shut for 4 months does not make by itself. There is a docket taped inside the fuse cupboard, a boiler service, a pressure test, 2 radiator valves, paid cash on the 16th of November by a woman who wrote her initials and left no surname. 16th of November is the morning after she stood at a counter on Wick Street and refused to buy my debt and told me it was mine and meant every word of it. So she kept her promise to the letter and then went round the outside of it by the width of a boiler, and she paid cash so it would never appear on any statement anybody could read, including me. I get the bus back and go up to her study, and she is awake, because she is always awake. I put the docket on the desk, and she looks at it and does not pretend for a second. She says the pipes would have split in December, and the split ones run behind the tile, and the tile is the only part of that room you cannot replace. I say, when were you in there? She says, I have not been in there. I say, then who was? And she reaches under the blotter and brings out a black book with a rubber band round it and opens it flat on the desk. Boiler man, she says, a Tuesday 9:10, and he was 50 minutes. Her finger stays on the line while she says it, and that line has been read enough times that the paper has gone soft along the edge. I say, what is that book? She says, the mileage book. Ozzy keeps it. Every car, every run, every gate since March. It comes up to the house on Sundays, and I read it in here before bed. Every Sunday, I have lived in that house, including every Sunday since the soup, including tonight, with a pencil beside it, an hour before I walked in and put a boiler docket in front of her. I say it out loud. I say, is today in that book? And she turns it round towards me instead of answering, and where my Sunday should be, the line is empty, because no car of hers went anywhere near me today. In the margin beside the empty line, in pencil, is the only thing she has got. Union Street at 2, the bus station. Into town on the bus, told me himself. And beside that, a small tick. I say, what is the tick for? She says, it means I did not have to find it out. Then she shuts the book and puts both hands flat on top of it like a lid and says, there are not very many ticks. And the cold comes up my back for the first time since October, because somewhere in November I decided the watching had stopped. It had not stopped. It had only stopped being unkind. She sees my face. She says, do you want me to stop reading it? I say yes. She says, all right, and then sits very still for a while and then says, ask me again on Tuesday, because I do not think I can do it tonight. Then she gets up and goes to the drawer and comes back with a sheet of paper and says, since we are doing this tonight, you should see the other one before Monday and not after it. It is a page in her handwriting in 2 columns, and it is a sale list. The cello, the horses, 4 paintings by name, a flat in a city I have never been to. The green book is not on that list, which I notice and do not mention. At the bottom of the left column, there is a total with a great deal of room in it, and that total is what she has if the vote goes the wrong way on Monday, and she spends the rest of her life being decorative. The right column is me. She has costed me. Every dollar I have actually spent since October, the diner rates, the bus fares, a $14 coat she did not know about, and she has turned it into a year. She says, $4,200 a year. Then she taps the left column and says, so that holds for 51 years, and I would be 75, and I have looked at what happens after that as well. I say, Delia, this is the most frightening thing anybody has ever handed me. And she looks honestly puzzled and says, but it is good news. It means Monday does not matter. And there it is at 2 in the morning in one sentence. Whichever way 7 old men vote, she has already worked out how to keep me, and the arithmetic has made her calm, and she would like me to be calm about it too. So I ask the question I have been going round since the terrace. I say, what happens if I say no? Not Monday. Any morning. I pack the bag and I go, and I do not come back. And that study goes quiet in a way no room in that house has gone quiet before. She looks at the desk a long time, then she says, I do not know. She says, that is the honest answer, and it is the one I have been trying not to have. Every other thing in my life I have costed. That one I have started twice and stopped, because I do not care for what I am by the second line. And she says, So please do not do it on a Monday, and she means it as a joke, and it does not come out as one, and neither of us laughs. I fold the sale list into my coat. She says, "Why?" And I say, "Because if I ever forget what you are, I would like to be able to read it." And she says, "That is fair," and puts the pen back in the pot. Then she puts her head down on her arms at about 4 and goes to sleep like that. And I put a coat over her and go up and lie on top of my bed with my shoes on until it is light. First Monday of December is clear and very cold, and the Vance building on Harrow Street has a room on the top floor with a table in it long enough that the men at the far end of it are strangers to me. The committee is down one side. The trustees are down the other. The auditors have brought their own water. Holloway has 2 juniors who keep their coats on. The press are along the wall, all of them described to me as passing. Cordelia is in black and she is already in her chair. Ozzy tells me she was standing at the doors at 9:30, in the cold, waiting for a porter to unlock a building her family owns most of. And halfway down the far side, hands folded on the cloth, sits a big man with white eyebrows, because Desmond Locke has brought his buyer along to watch. Halvard Brandt says good morning to me, kindly, and it goes through me like cold water. And at the back, on a row of chairs that somebody has put out and that nobody expected to be used, sits the household staff of Ashfield House in their own coats. Brandt, Nettie, Ozzy, Doheny with a document tube under his arm, and a woman from the kitchen who I have spoken to twice and who tells me, as I go past, that she has brought sandwiches in case it runs long. She sits with her hands flat on the cloth in front of her and does not look at the door once the whole morning, and that door is behind her left shoulder, and it never stops opening. Desmond Locke opens at 10:10, and I have to tell you honestly that he is very good, and that for about 10 minutes I believe him myself. He does not shout. He never once says a cruel word about her. He talks for 10 minutes about duty and about a family he has served for 26 years, and about how the hardest thing a trustee ever does is protect somebody from herself. She takes all 10 minutes of it with her chin up and her eyes on the middle of the table. Twice her thumb goes along the cloth, backwards and forwards, about an inch, and then stops and lies still. Then he plays the pieces. There is a screen at the end of the room, because, of course, there is a screen and a young man from his office to work it. Hales, in October. 31 seconds. A young woman in green handing a salt cellar to a man with both hands, and the man not looking at her. Hall at Ashfield. A gray stool, with the invoice put up on the screen beside it. The 22 employees standing in a line while a boy takes his coat off. The comedy club on Carver Lane. 8 seconds. Her carrying her own coat in the rain. That is the one that gets her. Not the salt and not the stool. 8 seconds of a woman carrying her own coat, and her hand comes up to her collar and holds it, and then she makes herself put the hand back down. And one I have not seen, from a phone in a corridor at the November party, of her walking upstairs behind me with her jaw set, and Locke lets it run and says quietly, "That is a woman going to fetch a document she was told to fetch." She was not. She was taking me to the folder. But the room does not know that, and the room makes a noise. I watch every pen along that wall write the same word down at the same moment, and I feel the temperature of that table drop about 10 degrees. Then Locke says, "I would now like to hear from Mr. Theodore Ward," and he says it kindly, and he looks at me the way a man looks at a chair he has already paid for. I stand up. Isadora Vance is at the far end. She does not nod. She simply waits, because she named her price in a yellow room and she is here to see it paid. So I pay it, standing up, with my hands out of my pockets, in front of the press along the wall, and a woman from the kitchen who brought sandwiches. I say, "My name is Theo Ward. I am 22. I cook." On the first Tuesday of October, I told Cordelia Vance to kneel on the floor of her own house and tie my shoes, in front of her butler, and she did it, and I looked down at her, and I said that down there was where she belonged. I look at her once while I am saying it, which is a mistake, because she nods. Very small once, the way a woman confirms a delivery, and then she puts both hands flat again and looks at the table. The room goes so quiet that I can hear the young man at the screen breathing. I keep going, because stopping is not in the price either. I say, on the 4th of October, I invented a waitress with a nice laugh so that she would feel replaceable at a dinner in front of 9 guests. On the 6th, I did not speak to her for a whole day, and she sat on the floor outside my room with her shoes off. I say, on the 10th, I told her at a restaurant that Madame does not choose the wine. On the 14th, I spent $22,000 of her money on a watch I hate to make her think I was a leech. On the 19th, I broke a 200-year-old cup on purpose while she watched. Every date I say, her chin comes up another fraction. She is doing the thing she does at the harbor when a man is shouting at her, which is to go very still and very polite and let all of it land. I go on for 4 minutes. I do the dates and the words. I do not soften one of them, and I do not explain a single one, because explaining was not in the price. When I stop, a journalist at the end has his hand over his mouth. One of the trustees is looking at the table. Nettie, at the back, is crying, and Grant has given her his handkerchief without looking at her. Cordelia is looking straight at me, and she is not crying at all. Her eyes are bright and furious, and the fury is not pointed at me, and I am the one who has to look away first. Locke lets the silence sit for exactly the right length of time, and then he says, "Thank you, Mr. Ward. That took courage." And I say, "No, it took nothing. Now I would like to talk about why none of it worked." I take the paperback out of my coat pocket and put it on the table. $2, water-stained, a man in sunglasses on the cover, 49 moves for the modern young master, page 50 torn out. I say, I did not invent any of that. I bought it at Union Street Station on the night I tried to leave. Every one of those things I just read out is on a numbered page, and under every page, there is a line in bold telling you what it will do. I read move 1 out loud. Give her a small order in front of the staff. Printed result, she feels reduced and begins to withdraw. Her mouth moves while I read it. She knows the line. She has it upstairs in green leather with a yellow tab on it, and a woman in black is mouthing along with a $2 paperback in front of the press. Then I look up and I say, she did not withdraw. She bought a stool. And I say, I have used 11 of these on her since October, and not one printed result has ever happened, and I would like somebody in this room to explain that to me. I say, because I tested the book on a member of staff, and it worked perfectly. It works on everybody. It works on you. Then I say, it only fails on somebody who was never being treated as a person in the first place, because there is no fall left in her to cause. And I put my hand on the second document I have brought, which is gray and has no title. Her shoulders come down about half an inch when I say it. That is the face of a woman who has been doing a sum in her own head for 10 years and has never once heard another person say the answer out loud. Holloway is on his feet before I touch it. He says that is a private trustee paper. I say, yes, it is. It is called Heir Profile and Valuation, and it was prepared when she was 14 years old, and there are 4 men at this table whose signatures are on the distribution list. And then, from the far end of that table, in a room with the press standing along the wall, Isadora Vance says, read it. 2 words from the end of the table, in a voice like a door closing, and Holloway sits down as if his strings have been cut. I read page 3, the table of observed traits and management notes. Under stubbornness, redirect with responsibility. Under solitary habits, acceptable, reduces exposure. And at the bottom of that page, in the same neat print as the dental records, the line that says overall temperament, manageable. Then I read page 5, heir premium, $31 million, being the excess value attaching to her person over and above the underlying assets. I do not look up while I say the figure, because I do not want to do that to her twice. She says it with me anyway. Under her breath, no expression on it at all, the way you say a number you have carried a long time. Nobody at that table looks at Cordelia. The auditors read their own water glasses. Halvard Brandt studies the ceiling, and she sits there with her hands flat and her chin up and lets them not look at her. I say, you have 13 clips of a woman being told what to do by a cook, and you have called it a defect. She has been told what to do by this table since she was a child, and it was called governance, and the only difference is that I never once put a price on her. Locke stands up. He says, this is very moving, and it is entirely beside the point. The question before the committee is not whether Miss Vance has been well treated. The question is whether her judgment is independent. And he turns to the trustees, and he says the sentence he has been building since March. He says, that young woman does whatever this boy tells her to do, and everybody in this room has now watched her do it, and that is the whole of it. She does not defend herself. She sits with her hands flat and lets a man describe her to a room full of people who own pieces of her, and the only thing that moves is her jaw once, like a door being tried. So I put on the mask one last time, and it goes on easier than it ever has, because I have been wearing it since October, and it has learned the shape of my face. I sit back down, and I put my arm along the back of the chair, and I make my face the face I made in October, and I say, right, then let us do the money, because I have not been paid. Locke's head comes round the way a bird's head does, all at once, without the body moving at all. I say to the room, on Thursday morning in the morning room at Ashfield, Mr. Locke offered me $3 million to sit in this chair and say what I have just said. I told him it was insulting. We settled at $7 million and the paper on my father's garage. There's a noise in that room like a held breath being dropped, and somebody's pen goes off the edge of the table and rolls. Her head comes round. She knows what I did on Thursday, and she still has to take hold of the arms of that chair while I say the number out loud in front of her grandmother, and her knuckles go white. And now, Desmond Locke has a problem, and it is a beautiful problem. And it is the only kind of trap that works on a certain man, because he built it himself back in January, and I only ever put the hinge on. If he says I am lying, then his witness is a liar, and his 13 clips have a liar narrating them, and his whole case walks out of the door with me. If he says I am telling the truth, then he has just been heard buying testimony at a hearing he convened. It takes about 4 seconds. I watch a man do 26 years of arithmetic in 4 seconds. Then he says, Mr. Ward is confused. There was a conversation about his future security, and it was entirely proper. She is watching him, and not me. Chin down, eyes on the side of his face, the way she watched a man called Kessel at a gate, and she has stopped breathing in any way that shows from where I am sitting. And I say, was it? Then perhaps you can tell the trustees what you laid on the table under the fireplace at 19 minutes past 11. Desmond Locke does not blink. He says he will not be cross-examined by a witness he has already heard from, and that his own documentation officer was in the house that morning and can speak to the character of the visit. Then he turns his head about 5 degrees without moving his body at all, and he says, Roland. And against the wall by the door, Roland Pike sits up the way a boy sits up when he is called on in class. He stands. He holds the tablet against his chest like a hymn book, and he does not open it. He says, Sir, I cannot confirm it. I was not in that room. I was in the plate room with Mr. Grant for 40 minutes, and what I read in there was forks. Locke says his name again, lower, and Pike says, Sir, I asked on the Friday for a minute of the Thursday meeting, because the diary had it down as an interview, and interviews are minuted. I was told it had not been a meeting. Nobody moves. Holloway has stopped writing. Then Pike says, May I answer properly, sir? It is the first question anybody has put to me since June, and I would like to give you the whole of it. He says, I interviewed 19 people at Ashfield on the 19th, and not one of them told me Miss Vance's judgment was unsound. I wrote that in my summary. The summary came back with a note asking me to concentrate on the incidents, and she turns her head and looks at Roland Pike for the first time all morning, at the man who has been asking her staff whether she sleeps, and her face does something complicated and then holds still. He says, after that, I was asked for clips instead, and in the car on Thursday, you told me the December matter was settled because the boy had taken it, and I entered that in the car log, sir. I enter everything. Then, in the same flat voice as all the rest, he says, at the private room on the 14th of November, you had me read Mr. Ward the committee terms. The committee holds the block 5 years. The chair takes 1.5% of block value every year. He says, I was corrected then for the phrase in line with market. Nobody has ever asked me who buys the harbor. Locke says, that will do, Roland. And Pike says, sir, and sits down and turns the tablet face down on the chair beside him and does not touch it again. I have not said a word for 4 minutes. I put my hands under the table because they have started shaking, and whatever happens now happens without me in it. Her hands are under that table as well. 2 people at a hearing sitting on their own hands about 6 feet apart, not looking at each other, waiting to be told what they are allowed to keep. Doheny gets up at the back with his tube, and he does not come to the table. He goes behind the chairs on the far side, stops at Halvard Brandt's shoulder, and bends down to his ear. He says it quietly, in the flat voice of a man who spent 31 years in uniform. Sergeant retired, security manager at Ashfield, and this is a pull from the insurer's archive signed by the head of household. Then he lays 2 photographs on the cloth in front of one man, face up, and goes and stands by the door, because a dealer does not walk away from $410 million on the word of a cook. He wants the date, and he wants his own name in the same picture. A morning room with fog in the window, a blue-backed agreement flat on a long table with a man's finger on the buyer line, Brandt Maritime Holdings. The 9th of January, and in the corner of both of them, the day and the hour are the ones I gave the trustees a minute ago. Cordelia has turned right round in her chair to watch a retired policeman walk behind the seats with a tube under his arm. She looks at me once. She looks like a woman watching a ship come in on the tide. Halvard Brandt reads them slowly, with his chin down, the way he looked up at those cranes. Then he pushes them away from himself and stands up and says, Mr. Chairman, Halvard Brandt Maritime. He says, I was told this division was coming to market and I came this morning to watch it come. I am withdrawing before the vote and I would like the minutes to show it in that order. He says $410 million off the table as of now. And the 1.5% a year for 5 years your chairman was taking on top of it, which his own man has just said out loud, I expect this room can see to that without me. She takes that with her chin up as well. $410 million leaving the table in one sentence, and all she does is put one hand over the other on the cloth and press down on it. She says, and I am not going on the photographs. The photographs give me a date. I am going on your documentation officer. You hired him, you brought him, you asked him, and he answered you. Then he looks down the table at Desmond Locke and says, I have bought horses. I look in the mouth myself and I pay for my own vet, and nobody has ever had to buy me a man to say the animal was sound. He says, 3 days a year I am allowed to touch other people's cranes, and I would like to still be allowed. Good morning to you. Then he sits down again, because a man does not run out of a room he has just emptied. The room comes apart. A small, furious trustee called Okonkwo is on his feet shouting about fiduciary duty at nobody in particular. The auditors put their heads together, and the thing that comes out of the huddle is the 9th of January. And at the back, the woman from the kitchen opens her sandwiches because it is running long and passes them down the row, and 2 journalists take one each and thank her in a whisper. Because a harbor was sold 11 months ago on the strength of a vote that has not happened yet. Desmond Locke sits very still and looks at the middle of the table where $410 million was a minute ago. I put the last thing on the table. 4 pages, brown envelope, a consultancy retainer for a Mr. W. Okafor, $60,000 paid in April in return for availability to provide a witness statement at a time to be determined. And on the counter signature line, in wet ink, the name of the firm that Mr. Holloway has used for the Vance family for 19 years. She reads it upside down from where she is sitting, because she has been reading papers upside down across tables since she was 14, and she says one word out loud, and the word is April. Holloway says my name. Just my name, once, and then he does not say anything else for the rest of the day. And she looks at Holloway the way you look at a chair that has stood in a room your whole life, and then she writes one line on the pad in front of her and puts her hand flat over the top of it. Then Grant stands up at the back with the household record under his arm, and he asks the chairman for a minute of the committee's time. He does not open the book, he puts it down on the chair behind him. He says, "On the 19th, Mr. Pike asked me whether I would call Miss Vance's conduct sound, and I said I would need time to prepare a characterization." He says, "I have had my time, sir, and I find I do not need the book for it." He says he has kept that record 29 years, and everything in it is already written down, and that a characterization is a thing a man says with his own mouth or does not say at all. He says, "On the first Tuesday of October, I watched Mr. Ward tell that girl to kneel in her own hall and tie his shoes, and I watched her do it, and within the hour, she ordered a stool from Milan at $11,000 so it would be comfortable when it happened again." Then he says, "On the 13th of November, Mr. Ward put a building in his own name at 11% so his sister could have her medicine, rather than ask Miss Vance for $410. He says, "I did not see Wick Street. Ozzy drove them, and Ozzy tells me things, and I write them down. Miss Vance stood at that counter with the money in her coat, and she did not pay it off." He says she had worked out that the boy needed the debt to be his, and she has not mentioned it since, to him or to me. That is a young woman who was handed away to buy a person, and looked at it and put it back down. And that is where she goes. Not the folder, not the clips, not the money. A butler saying out loud that she once stood at a counter and did not buy something, and her eyes fill up, and she will not lift a hand to them. He says, "In 29 years, I have not seen anybody else at this table do that once." Then he picks the book up off the chair and holds it against his side and says, "That is my characterization, sir," and sits down, and Nettie hands him back his handkerchief. And Desmond Locke, who is finished and knows he is finished, does the last thing a man like that does. He goes for the only door left. He says to the trustees, "None of this touches the point. Watch." And he turns to Cordelia, and he says, "Miss Vance, would you leave the room, please?" And there it is, move 31, in a room with her family in it, played by a man who never had to buy the book. Put her out in public in front of the people who own her, and watch her come apart. She asked me once to tell her in advance if I was ever going to do that one, so she could eat something first, because her grandmother watches her plate. Nobody has told her a thing this morning, and she does not move. Not her hands, not her chin, not 1 inch of her. So he says it again, louder, and adds, "You see, she takes instruction from one person only," and he points at me and says, "Go on then. Tell her. Show them all." And I look at her down the length of that table, and she looks back at me, and I know exactly what he wants and exactly what it will do, and I say it anyway because it is the only piece we have not spent. I say it flat and bored, in the October voice, the one I have used on her since the first Tuesday of October. I say, "Delia, leave the room." And there is a silence in there you could hang a coat on, and every head at that table turns to watch a rich girl obey a cook. And Cordelia Vance sits in her chair with her hands flat on the table in front of the committee, and the press, and her grandmother, and she says, "No." She says it clearly. She says, "No, Theodore, I am the general partner of the Harbor Division, and this is a meeting about my company, and I will be staying until it finishes." Then she turns to the trustees and says, "That is the first time in my life I have said that word to anybody, and I would like the minutes to record who asked me for it and who I said it to." The vote is taken at 20 past 12. I do not watch the hands go up. I have watched that table all morning, and I want to see this one land, so I watch her face instead of the room. 4 trustees for. None against. 1 abstention from a man who leaves immediately afterwards and is not seen again. 38% transfers. She does not smile. Her chin comes up about half an inch and stays there, and her hands come off the cloth and go down into her lap, and under that table they are shaking hard enough to move the chair. Then she asks the clerk, in the Harbor voice, whether the minutes have the word "no" in them, and where. He finds it and reads it back to her with the time against it, 12 minutes past 12, and that is when it arrives on her. Her eyes go bright and she puts her hand flat over her mouth in front of 7 old men and a row of journalists and her own grandmother, and she keeps it there. Down the table, Isadora Vance watches her do it and says nothing at all and does not look away either, and from that woman that is about as close to applause as anybody is ever going to get. Desmond Locke is removed as chair by the same vote, and the matter of the January agreement goes to the auditors, and the auditors have their own lawyers by 2 o'clock, and after that it stops being my business. Alfred Brandt writes to her himself that same afternoon, 1 page in his own hand. He says he was told the division was already coming to market, and he asks her to believe that, and she does, and he still never touches those cranes. Desmond Locke does not look at me on the way out. He looks at her, and he says, quite quietly, "You will be twice as hard as your father in 3 years," and she says, "Thank you, Desmond. That is the nicest thing anybody has said to me today." The paperwork takes until February, and I understand about 1/3 of it, and Priya explains the other 2/3 to me twice. Garage note, 206,000 is discharged, and the paper comes to me in an envelope, and I put it in the drawer with the deed and I do not burn it, because burning things is for people who are still frightened. My sister's aftercare goes into a trust in her own name at an independent bank, irrevocable, funded to her 25th birthday, with the school written in beside it at 19,000 a term until she is done with it. There are 2 trustees on that trust who are not Vances and cannot be leaned on by anybody. Mira signs it herself and spells her own middle name wrong. The car outside my sister's school stays. I ask about it twice and get the same answer twice, which is that the men are paid monthly and it would be rude to stop them halfway through a month, and that it is now March. By the summer, Mira knows both their names and takes them coffee at break and has taught the younger one a card game, and she tells me they are the only part of my life she approves of. Cordelia does not put $1 into that trust. Isadora does, out of her own money, and when I ask her why, she says, because I would like the boy to owe me, and I have known her long enough now to hear the other thing underneath it. Nettie keeps her job. She pays the 40,000 back out of her wages at 150 a month, at her own insistence, and she has worked out that she will be 41 when it is finished, and she will not be argued out of it. Cordelia pays her mother's shop debt separately and tells her it is not connected, which is a lie that everybody in that house agrees to. Wes loses the lease. There is nothing anybody can do about that, because the money was never his. He works the fit out on the diner instead, for wages, and on the day we open, he stands behind my shoulder and does not say anything clever for once. Ambrose comes back. He is 67 and he hates fishing. He walks in on the 2nd of March, looks at his own kitchen, tells me my station is filthy, and puts an apron on, and I sell him the building back for $1. Danny comes home from the other city in April, and Rosa does not, because Rosa is in Lyon, and Lyon is where she should be, and she sends a photograph of her station with my name written on the back of it. Louise and Beck do not come home either, and I have stopped waiting for them, and that is a cost I paid without ever being asked whether I wanted to. Priya Rains is now the operating director of the Harbor Division, and she signs things with 2 hands and shouts at Rotterdam personally. Ozzy is offered a raise and asks instead for the lodge to be re-roofed, which tells you everything about Ozzy. And in the servants' hall at Ashfield, there is now a long table with 19 chairs at it. Nobody announces it, and nobody reads anything out. It is simply in the room one morning in January, with the counter behind it wiped down and bare. Grant comes in at 7 and looks at it for a while with his glasses in his hand. Then he pulls a chair out and sits on it, which is the first time he has sat down in that room in 29 years. And the rest of them sit with him, one at a time, working it out as they come through the door. Doheny carries his kettle in from the security office and makes a joke that nobody laughs at, because by then they are all crying. The valuation brief was withdrawn in front of witnesses on the 12th of December. Isadora Vance signed the retraction herself in her own hand at the yellow room table, and Holloway was not invited. She said one sentence while she did it. She said, "I was told to produce it, and I produced it well, and that was the whole of my mistake, and I made it for 40 years. Then she gave the folder to Cordelia, and Cordelia held it for a while, and then put it in the fire, and the 2 of them stood there and watched $31 million go up the chimney of a house neither of them chose. And then, in January, something happens that I did not plan and could not have planned, because it is in no book anywhere. At the end of January, I have a diner, a debt at 11%, a sister with her own trust, and a garage note in my drawer with my own name printed on it. Every keyhole in that lock is open. I can walk out of the gate of Ashfield House on any morning I like, and nobody on this earth can take one thing from me for doing it. I know this because on the 1st of February, I do it. I get up and I pack the same duffel bag and I walk down the drive, and Ozzy does not follow me and nobody rings anybody, and I get all the way to the platform at Union Street and stand under the board watching the minutes drop. And then I buy a coffee and I get the bus back because I left a woman asleep in a chair with a cello on her lap, and I want to be there when she wakes up and tries to pay me for the coffee. I tell her about it that evening. All of it, the bag, the platform, the board. She listens with her hands around a cup, and when I finish she says, "So you went?" And I say, "Yes," and she says, "And you came back?" And I say, "Yes." She says, "All right." Then she says, "Are you going to do that every year?" And she asks it without any fear in it at all, which is new. And I say, "Probably." And she thinks about that seriously for a while, the way she thinks about birth windows. And then she says, "All right, but tell me the date in advance, because I would like to not sit at the window." We have one rule now, and it is the only order I have ever given her that is still standing. She has to ask out loud, not buy, not arrange, not have Priya schedule it. If she wants something from me, she has to say the words with her own mouth, and she is appallingly bad at it, and she practices in the car like a woman learning a language late. First month it comes out as a memo. The second month she says, "I would like you to sit here," and then apologizes for a full minute. By April she can say, "Stay," and by June she can say, "I missed you today," and then look absolutely furious about having said it. What it costs her, I only find out by accident, and it is an index card. She carries one in her sleeve now, the same numbered cards she takes on stage, and in February I lift her coat off a chair and one drops out of it and lands face up on the floor between us. I get to it first. She puts her hand out and says, "No. Give it here, I will do it, because if you read it quietly, I will have to stand there watching your face, and I would rather have a job." So she stands in my kitchen with her coat over my arm and reads me her own card out loud, top to bottom, in the voice she uses for birth numbers, and she does not skip a single line. It is a list of what she did not buy: a building on Carver Lane, a magazine, 2 survey firms, a shop on Dell Street, and the flat above it. Every line has a date, a thing, and a price, and she reads the prices out as well. Then she gets to a new range for my kitchen, $9,000, and beside it, in pencil, it says, "Asked him first, he said no." She reads the pencil out too, and that is the bit that goes through me. 46 lines. Then the total at the bottom, which she says quietly without looking up, and that total is the size of a small hospital, and every line on it is a thing she wanted to do to make my life easier without asking me whether I wanted it easier. I say, "Why do you keep it?" And she says, "Because it is the only list I own that gets longer while I do nothing, and I would like it to be very long by Christmas," and she takes her coat back off my arm. I say, 46 is already long. She says, 46 is nothing, and puts her chin up and waits, fishing so openly that I laugh out loud in my own kitchen, and she looks delighted and pretends she does not. She starts a fresh card in March. The first line on it is a delivery van for the diner, and beside it in pencil, wanted to, did not. And she shows me that one herself, on purpose, at breakfast, holding it flat. And then, on a Tuesday in April, with the new card going well and the practicing in the car going well, she comes off it completely. There is a woman who comes into the diner at 7 every morning. She is about 60. She works nights at the sorting office. She has the same thing every day, and she talks to me across the pass for about 4 minutes while I do the eggs. 4 minutes. Cordelia has been counting them since the second week because Cordelia counts, and she has not said one word about it, which should have told me something on its own. So on the third Tuesday in April, I come in the back at 6:30, and the front of my own diner is dark. The door is locked, the blind is down, and one woman is sitting at the counter with her hands folded. She has bought the room. Every cover, the whole service, 7 till 3, at menu price plus the tips the staff would have made, $480, and she names the figure before my coat is off, because she wants me to know that she costed it properly. And I stand in an empty diner with my own regulars building up in the cold outside the glass, and it is the front hall at Ashfield all over again, and my stomach drops about a floor and a half. I say, "Delia." She says, "I know." I say, then say it out loud. And her chin comes up and her eyes go bright and wet and furious, and it takes her about 8 seconds to get it out of her mouth. She says, "I did not want anybody else to be able to sit down." Then I unlock the door and let the 7 o'clock in, and she has to sit at that counter for 2 hours with strangers at both elbows, one of whom is the woman from the sorting office, and it is the hardest thing I have ever done to her, and she takes it like a soldier. At about 9, the sorting office woman asks her what she does, and Cordelia says, "Ships," and the woman says her brother was on the ships, and 40 minutes later, the two of them are arguing about a birth in 1979. Her elbows are on my counter and her cards are in her pocket, and she has entirely forgotten to be a Vance. She writes the 480 on the card that night, in the wrong column, and underlines it and will not let me look. The book is on the shelf above the pass at the diner, both copies, the $2 one and the green leather one, and the cooks think it is a joke, and it is. Page 50 is still missing out of mine, so in March, I write my own, in pencil, on the blank paper at the back, and it is 1 line long. 50. Ask her what she wants, and then do not charge her for it. Printed result, unknown, because nobody in her entire life has ever run the experiment.
So that is the story of a boy who read a manual about how to be the worst man in the world and used every trick in it, and found out that cruelty only hurts a person who was being treated like a person in the first place. He tried to be terrible on purpose to buy his freedom, and every terrible thing he did got picked up and used by somebody who was much better at it than he was. What actually got him out was not a trick. It was a plate of eggs that cost 40 cents, a butler who wrote things down for 29 years, and a friend who came back with the envelope. And what got her out was learning to say one small word out loud to the one person she wanted to keep.